I'm Ray Sanchini, executive producer of Titanic.
John Landau, producer of Titanic. Roll movie. Well, it's interesting because depending upon where you saw the movie, you either saw the Fox logo or the Paramount logo. International releases saw the Fox logo first, and domestic release saw the Paramount logo. The opening was something Jim didn't really figure out till well into post-production.
I think it was very significant for him. He'd never done the main titles at the end of the film and opened a movie so simply with so few credits. And I think that he had this sense that this was really such a different film for him, that he wanted it to look differently from the absolute beginning.
So I think one night he went into his little television screening room at home and viewed 20 different movies that he sort of put in the same genre, and looked at their openings and sort of devised his own. From the titles, we transition into the deep dive, which started more than a year and a half before principal photography began.
Yeah, we were out there in August of '95, before we had a script or, needless to say, a green light on the film.
I've been on 9 expeditions to Titanic and made 33 dives. And one of the things that gets to me and that I always like to see is the reaction of somebody after their first dive, where they get up close and personal with Titanic. I think Jim viewed Titanic as a major prop, the nucleus for his film. When he came back from the first dive, it was very clear that he now had a reverence for the wreck, the era, and the tragedy and the stories behind this piece of iron sitting on the bottom of the ocean.
I'll never forget the very first time Jim dove down and got to see the Titanic with his own eyes. He came back up, and I could tell that moment had a huge impact on him. He was still writing the script at the time, and I think because of that actual contact, it did a lot to steer the direction that the script would go. And I think even if a single frame of film footage was not used in that movie from the deep dive, which a lot of it was actually used, the dives alone were worth the experience that Jim had with the lost shipwreck.
These first images, a lot of them are actually images that Jim shot on his first dive to Titanic. These shots of the mirror are, again, from Jim's first expedition. I remember seeing this footage in '95 when Jim first came back from this amazing trip that he had taken. And I actually see the ship this well lit. I'd seen other images of the ship before, but none of them had as much detail, because Jim had 2 mirror subs to light the wreck with.
She landed at 2:30 in the morning of April 15th.
Jim, in his creativity, every night would give me a lighting sketch of all the lights and where he wanted them placed on the submersible, so he could really go into the field, go 2.5 miles down on Titanic, and actually get the footage for a feature film.
Jim announced that Titanic would be his next film to the reporter from The Hollywood Reporter. I don't think he was wholly confident of that until he'd successfully completed the deep dive and gotten these images and actually visited the wreck site himself.
The project had a code name called Planet Ice. The script was incredibly long. It was a very complex read, and it was going to be a big undertaking. And just by reading the script, you knew it was going to be epic. You knew there was going to be a lot of homework, a lot of research, and you knew it had to be correct to respect those who perished in that event and to the facts about the personal accounts of what happened on that night.
These windows are 9 inches thick.
The opening of the film had a lot of issues about setting the tone, and the whole underwater section, exploring, and then we finally see the wreck. It's very ghostly and very ethereal, almost reverential. And I think Jim was very taken by his actual experience going underwater and seeing the wreck. And in that opening scene, he talked a lot about the submarines and the ROVs. And in reality, these machines made all sorts of interesting high-tech sound. And we tried to put them in, but they hurt the mood. So we ended up backing off from reality in this modern reality of these submarines and the ROVs. And it was very important to set the right tone.
The ROVs were Hollywood props. They were never intended to actually go inside the wreck. Corporations and organizations that actually do this for a living, they rely on their ROVs for their business and couldn't risk sending them inside of a wreck. But as a film business, it was a prop to us. And if we lost it, we could build another prop less expensively, and Jim took the chance of going in and actually saw some incredible things that people didn't know existed before Jim went in there with the ROVs.
This shot here with the sea silt coming at us, it's always haunted me. That was one of the first images I saw from the original expedition that Jim came back with in 95, and that just set the hook in me. And here we're looking at Snoop, which was the real ROV that Jim used in 95, but it was very limited. He could go down this grand staircase, and Jim pushed this thing in there, probably at great risk to losing the vehicle, which happened to us on the expedition 2001. We lost one of the ROVs inside Titanic, and were able to get it out of there. I don't know how. I think that's just a testament to Jim's tenacity. This was all a set that Jim recreated in Escondido, I believe. You'll see a shoe in the sand, or a doll's head, or some suitcases laying there. Images that represent the human side of Titanic.
I love this shot of the doll's face. That's a doll that you see a little Cora holding later in the film. I love how it ties to our 1912 footage.
One of the underwater sets that we had to reproduce was the first-class stateroom. We're trying to make it as realistic to tomb of Titanic as it is today. Jim had been down and he had shot previously with his ROVs the interior of Titanic, and he knew exactly what it looked like. He'd brought back some amazing photographs and some fantastic footage, and we were just trying to build a set that would resemble that. This was the first set that we were building. It was in Escondido, so it was very close to LA, so Jim would come down and visit it quite a lot. It was just the interior. It was all the wonderful sand and the silt that had built up over all the years. The lovely piano, the white crab, and it had to match exactly the footage that Jim had shot.
Okay, right there.
He wanted it to be right. He always said to us, I've been there, I've seen it, it has to be right. So the plates that we made, all of the interesting pieces of furniture were all made exactly how they were on Titanic at that time.
We're in, baby, we're there.
And there are a number of shots throughout this sequence where we added digital fish into the shots. It added the sense that it was real, even though they were on our set that we shot in Escondido.
The water run.
Jim took me through all these sequences. He had actually done this. He had been me going down there, exploring the wreck. And so I felt like these scenes, I played these scenes pretty well, but I owe it all to Jim. He kind of took me through it. We went through a series of discussions as to who would be right to play the Brock Lovett character, because he is the first character that you see in the movie. And it was important to set the right tone for the movie.
Jim was originally thinking older. We talked about Gene Hackman, James Garner, and these kind of great classic actors.
Sean Connery.
Mm-hmm. Bill was, of course, somebody Jim had worked with a number of times. I think he was almost resisting the choice because of it. And he'd seen the character as, a little older, a little saltier. But ultimately, I think Bill just revealed himself as the perfect choice for this character. And I think he just executes it so beautifully.
Here we have the Kelders sitting off the coast of Halifax. And these were some of our first unit production days. And we started as complicated as you could. We had 2 ships operating. We had 2 helicopters operating. We had launch boats. It was a real 3-ring circus out there.
Some of the realities that people have learned is that it's very hard to shoot on water practically. You can't have any true infrastructure when you're not on solid land. And you have assets and resources that have to travel to you. So it was grueling. It was very hard. At times we had inclement seas, 1 to 2 meter swells. We were on an international ship. We were on a Russian submarine ship.
The Academic Keldysh is actually listed in Jane's World Ships as a Soviet spy ship. And the Russians kind of thought they were pretty snapped into production protocols and everything else until 1995 when James Cameron came aboard.
Jim was emphatic that we go far enough out to where we couldn't see any horizon lights. And I would say there were days where we would travel an hour and 20 minutes outside of Halifax, which means when you're done shooting, that's what you have to travel back. So it was a real adventure. You'd wrap an actor and you couldn't go anywhere. Bill, we're done with you tonight. Great. It's 12 midnight, so you catch up on his sleep and just go sleep downstairs. But it was really difficult.
fun as far as I'm concerned. You know, the ship's coming across the Atlantic and the guys are rigging it on the way. They're up there welding in the high seas, and it was just really exciting. Now the ship's here. Let's meet the Russians. Let's go on board the ship. Let's figure out places to hide the equipment. Let's walk through the shots. It was just awesome.
You know, the movie has this strange art imitates life, imitates art kind of thing about it. I mean, we really were out on this ship shooting these scenes. We were with these crew guys. And then 5 years after the movie came out, I actually went and had this experience for real when I made 4 descents to the Titanic. I always think this is kind of funny. I'm more interested in the diamond than the beautiful shot of Kate Winslet there.
Be goddamned.
Jim needed to find someone to kind of create a template for Old Rose. He was looking for kind of a centenarian who might still be around that he could meet. And my wife, Louise, suggested this prominent artist, a ceramicist who lived up in the Upper Ojai.
Beatrice Wood, the great ceramist, was the major fountain that Jim was thinking about when he created Rose. And I think his interpretation of her was very true.
Louise gave Jim a copy of her autobiography, which was called I Shock Myself. And Jim realized after several interviews with the real Beatrice Wood that she was a real character. And I think a lot of the kind of prickliness and kind of mischievousness that Gloria Stewart played as Old Rose really came from Beatrice Wood.
Jim took me up to a luncheon for her, I think, 101 birthday or 102 birthday. And at the end of the meal, her assistant said to her, "Beata, you did not eat your dessert." And she looked at it and she said, "I only like chocolate and young men." She died a few days later.
One of the things that we face throughout the production, and it's illustrated in this scene, is a tremendous amount of looping or ADR. We always had huge machinery working in the background. And I think we ended up with over 100 days of ADR on the movie, replacing lines of dialogue with clean lines of dialogue.
Calvert, Rose Calvert, Mrs. Calvert.
And it's great to hear we cast this 86-year-old actress, and we had to put her through an hour or two a day of old age makeup to make her look even older. But Gloria, throughout the whole process, was an incredible trooper and was able to convey so much with the slightest of expressions and effort. The one thing that she was hesitant about on the whole movie was flying in a helicopter.
I said to Cameron, "I will not fly in a helicopter and land on that ship. I will not do it." He said, "But this is the biggest and safest helicopter on the West Coast." I said, "I don't care, Jim. I won't do it. I will not fly in a helicopter and land on this ship the size of a postage stamp." So he said, "Well, will you fly in it if we take a picture of you flying in it, and then we'll land it, and then we'll put you in the helicopter so it looks like you're getting out of it?" And I said, "Well, all right." So it was the noisiest, dirtiest, most upsetting thing I did in the whole picture was flying in that helicopter.
The first day that we shot with a helicopter was such a nightmare because we had to actually rebuild another ship to land the helicopter on. It's not actually the Keldysh. The Keldysh couldn't support the weight of one of those big helicopters. So we made another, I believe it was a Coast Guard ship, look like the Keldysh so we could land the helicopter there.
And we built the matching helipad just as a set prop on the Keldysh itself. So now we're looking back at the Keldysh on our fake helipad set, but all of the shots looking in the other direction, like this shot, for example, this is all on the Coast Guard cutter. We had people on the first day of the shoot who were getting sick from the fumes of the helicopter because most people just work around the helicopter. They come in and they come out normally. Here we were staging scenes around it and had to do multiple takes. Sort of our production person up in Halifax was the gentleman who handed the fish to Bill Paxton there.
Very nice. Have you met my granddaughter?
And just the fact that Jim wrote into the script the idea that this character of Rose takes her pictures with her, that she brings her life with her onto the ship. Really gave people a sense of who she was early on. Not just the pictures, but also her dog.
I would like to see my drawing.
This drawing of Rose, we did in advance. Kate came in and posed, and Jim is actually the one who drew the picture himself. And that's actually our first look at Leo, where we just see his eyes, and we play him off of her eyes. And eyes are very important in this movie. There's a shot later on where we morph from young Rose's eyes to old Rose's eyes, and it's a way of connecting the present with the past.
And during this scene, the line was, "Wasn't I a hot number?" And I said, "No, Jim, I can't say that. That's so vulgar. I don't think she would say that." And he said, "Be my guest. What would you say?" I said, "Well, I have to think about it. I don't know, but I'm not going to say, wasn't I a hot number?" So I came up with, "Wasn't I a dish?" And everybody applauded. So afterwards, I said to him, "I think I should have writer's credit somewhere along the line." He said, no, he didn't think so. Imagine someone named Hockley.
I didn't really know who Gloria Stewart was before that day. I had an inkling, but then I had done my research, and I found out that, like, Gloria Stewart was Claude Rains' leading woman in the original Invisible Man, and that she'd made all these huge movies back in the 30s, and that she'd been best friends with James Whale, the director of the original Frankenstein. I mean, we're talking about old Hollywood in its inception. So he's really Hollywood royalty. But then kind of later in life began this very subdued, kind of grandmotherly, if you will, life that belied this very glorious past that she had with the Hollywood and everything. And so it was that day that she was telling her story. And I was coming from a place, like, in my character's mind, I don't believe a word she's saying. Like, how can she possibly have been on the Titanic? But I think Gloria, insofar as that she had led this wonderful life, this kind of incredible life, she's led like 3 or 4 incredible lives. She had this way of bringing you into the story kind of slowly, and then kind of swept you along with it.
Louis Abernathy is an interesting story. He's not a professional actor. He's actually a friend of Jim's, who Jim invited on the initial expedition to Titanic. And when it came time to cast the role, he instead of turning to a professional actor, he turned to a friend who turned out to be a great actor. So it worked out well.
There's a brilliant storytelling element to give the audiences sort of blow by blow of the actual mechanics of the ship sinking.
Jim shows the audience this computer simulation. He goes, you know what? Not only he goes, I'm going to show you that right up front, and then I'm going to make you live through that experience. That's a great storyteller who realizes the power of that.
So what happens?
I have to explain exactly the anatomy of the death of the Titanic. Now, I had worked for weeks memorizing this one bit of business so that I could get it all in one take. And I think there was actually one take where I got the entire monologue out without a mistake. And it would have been much easier to do if I could actually see what you're seeing on the screen now, but you can't. That was put in digitally later by computer graphics. And what I'm actually looking at is a green screen. But I know the next day, after I had done it on camera, I kind of threw it out of my mind and I couldn't deal with it. So when Jim did the turnaround for Gloria, all I could say was blah, 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 Titanic sinks. And I took a little bit of business from both Gloria and Jim for, quote unquote, phoning it in, on that day.
Yet Gloria tells us that it's not about, the physics of what happened. It's the personal experience that made that night so memorable, not just for those who survived, but for the whole world. And this is the first time Gloria gets a look at the ship, and we don't know her story yet, so we don't know what that holds, but she's certainly letting us know that it holds a lot. Those shots on the monitors are shots from our set in Escondido. On other monitors, like this one,
it's actually from the wreck site.
And again, just tying it to tying the present with the past and understanding that, one of the themes that Jim had throughout was the idea of elegance submerged.
My character just really doesn't give a damn about the old Rose. I don't care how far I have to push her to get what I want. But of course, I'm going to learn that, again, I haven't looked at the human tragedy. I'm a materialist.
Okay, just try to remember him.
Bill Paxton was wonderful to work with. He was so terrific, so giving and receiving as an actor, really 84 wonderful. Years.
This is one of her best moments in the movie, Gloria Stewart, where she first takes us back. She talks about, it's been 84 years, but I can still remember, the smell of the paint, that the china had never been eaten off of, the sheets had never been slept in, all that. That's a great speech, great speech.
And it was.
And then going off of that, and these amazing transitions. This is an amazing transition into the ship as it was on the day it embarked from Southampton.
We wanted to use visual effects to transport the audience back to 1912. And I think no one shot really does that more than the transition to Southampton Dock.
The shot got a big reaction at the premiere, which was a great feeling.
It was the big Southampton scene, which was, I think, must have been a nerve-wracking day for the whole crew because we had thousands of extras on that scene. And I was called to the set to ask how she should get out of the car. Take the hat off would have been a good answer. We devised a way of the hand coming out first, and then the foot, and then the hat, and then the rest of the body. And of course, when Jim saw that, he knew exactly how to shoot it because he shot it from above. And you saw her hand first, and then the foot, and then the hat. And then eventually we revealed her looking gorgeous and stunning. So I was very pleased that that instruction got onto the film.
We started with Southampton Pier, and that was a huge production number. That had automobiles, draft horses, wagons, 2,000 extras, cranes, raising cars up into the holds, extras up on the deck as passengers, inspection lines, steerage, big, huge production number. But we were a well-oiled machine in the beginning. Everybody was vibrant. Everybody had their feet underneath them. We were all strong. We were getting great shots. Everything was full steam ahead.
I had absolutely no idea how big it was even then in its conception and the size of the budget, and I just didn't know, really. And I'm, to this day, grateful that I didn't know because I was very young, and I think if I had known all of those things, I would have probably been very freaked out and intimidated, and I would have felt under tremendous pressure. But I didn't, I was given a part that I longed for and wanted to play and really went after.
It was just amazing to be on that set that day. Everything was so real. Even the extras in the background that never even got on camera all had costumes that were authentic from the period.
We had a tremendous opportunity on this film in that the sheer amount of people that you were going to have to dress was massive. And also the fact that it was a period in history that was very, very opulent. So we started to go around the world to rental houses. After a few months, people saw us coming, and everyone was so excited about the project even then.
Here we're coming off of a little matte painting and model into the set where Leo is playing cards.
Jim wanted to heighten the drama. He wanted the ship to appear large and looming and very dominant in the background. He wanted the weather to be dramatic, make photo blow-ups of the Titanic because the actual model was not available to us. We took photographs of the model, and we built the dockside as accurately as we possibly could from existing photographs, and then enhance it all by adding people in digitally.
Well, here's our introduction to Leo, who, prior to Romeo and Juliet and Titanic, had kind of been known as a kid actor, excellent kid actor. But so when we first meet him, we've kind of roughed him up a bit, smoking a cigarette, he's drinking, he's playing poker. He's definitely not a kid anymore.
Niente.
Well, the funny thing about Danny Nucci is I thought his accent was absolutely authentic until his wife had a baby, and I was assigned the duty of calling him at the hospital room to tell him we needed him back on set. We gave him a couple days off, day or two. And this man answered the phone. He sounded like he was from New York. And it was Danny. I'd never heard him talk in his normal voice. He maintained his accent throughout when he was on Titanic. So I really didn't know he didn't speak like that normally.
I remember sitting here with Leo. We were sitting at this card table for hours and smoking those awful cigarettes. God, we were so exhausted by the end of the scene. We must have jumped up and screamed and had fun like this for 8 hours. Just jumping up and celebrating for 8 hours will exhaust you. I started shooting this scene. It was one of my first days, and I got to the set, and Jim Cameron said, we're going to be running through all these horses and people and trying to get on the ship because we're late. And when I got there, it was the first time I actually saw all this period stuff, including the boat and everybody in costume. And it's the first time I realized the scope of the film we were making. It's like, none of that is green screen. That's us. That's all those people.
Have you been through the inspection queue?
You see this moment of them running to the ship and their exuberance, and it's in such a stark contrast to Rose's attitude when she gets off. Again, it just setting up the differences between, first and third class.
And it's also in stark contrast to, what lies ahead, and that this, most people wouldn't consider winning a ticket on Titanic and making it on board by seconds the luckiest moment in their lives.
This is a shot where we have to make the ship sail, and there are 96 different digital elements that go into that one shot. We combine digital people with model ships, with CGI background skies, CGI birds, and model tugboats, and it's a combination of all different effects. So we had our set built, and of course we couldn't move it. It was an 800-foot long set. So what Jim did is he put people on a car and moved that car against our huge ship to create the illusion that the ship was moving.
The ships with the tugs, again, everything just selling the massive size of this ship.
This is a live sailboat that we went out and shot in Santa Monica Harbor, and we digitally put behind it the ship. Jeanette Goldstein. There you see Van Ling, who plays the Chinese man.
Desperately trying to translate one of the English signs on the ship.
There was such a melting pot of people aboard Titanic that they didn't just come from one nationality. They came from all over the world.
At some point in time, we actually knew how many different nationalities were represented on Titanic. It was pretty amazing. Most of them did not speak English, and this added to the confusion, of course, later on when disaster struck.
And the same thing can be said for our set, where we had a multinational crew on our set.
And that did complicate things a bit, yes. It was we were a bilingual set.
More than bilingual. We had people from Prague and Czechoslovakia and Mexico and Canada and England and all over.
Contrasting steerage with the extraordinary elegance and beauty of the first-class accommodations.
And the fireplace, we matched to the fireplace that Jim found when he dove the wreck. The paintings are an interesting story because a woman that we found up in Canada during our Halifax shoot as a scenic artist, we brought down to Mexico, and she actually was the one who painted the paintings that were supposed to be representative of great artists of the time. This shot sort of combined everything and just sold what you could do with digital technology. It was a model ship with digital people and a digital sky in the background.
I think Kathy Bates, in addition to being an extraordinary actress, eerily resembles the true Molly Brown, and I think she really sold the character both in her appearance, and she really captured the energy and the fortitude of Molly.
By the next afternoon.
Again, we turned to a second unit director and several visual effects houses to sort of bring the great ship to life in this engine room sequence.
Well, the engine room is the very last thing we shot. So suddenly I come along and I want to do my cool little engine room sequence. And all I get is no. We have no money. We can't build a set because the original plans were this really cool set. That got scrapped and it got smaller and smaller. Jim looked at it. we need to tell the audience that this is a huge engine room, but we need to cheat the scale a little bit. At the time, they were huge, but today people see 747s, they see all this big, the huge vessels, aircraft carriers. So we, in essence, made the engine room 1/3 bigger than it really was, because it was literally done with models. And we would do motion control matching and a bunch of complicated things, shooting against a green screen and having it all, digitally added later. And the other trick I did in addition to that is I hired 5-foot-tall stuntmen for all the green screen photography. So that made it look even bigger. So all these guys are only 5 feet tall, walking around oiling the engines and doing all of their maintenance as we were filming it.
This is an all-digital shot right here. One of the only ones like that in the movie, where we're underwater and everything in it is digital, no model ship.
I had no idea that this was what it was going to look like. When we shot the bow scene, it was just a little piece of the bow suspended 5 stories high with no ship anywhere in sight. And so to actually see this for the first time, it all began to make sense.
This shot was very critical to us. We said to ourselves, how would a real cruise line today shoot a commercial? And this was a shot that we came up with. And what sort of culminated and brought everything together was James Horner's score at this point, which just gives you that incredible sense of accomplishment and joy.
I wanted to give it an Irish sort of exuberance. I wanted to give the whole sailing on this ship this tremendous optimism. I didn't want to darken it. I didn't want to foretell anything. I wanted to bring a different kind of energy to the film. And I went home from that meeting and from seeing the movie and started doodling on themes. And I would say I had all the thematic stuff written within 25 minutes.
Jim said, you have nailed the tone of this movie. Nailing the tone meant having an epic feel, but a contemporary sound. Not sounding too old-fashioned in terms of the period sound of it, but modern enough to draw modern audiences into that period.
One of the things that people have to remember is that we never went on the open water for any of the 1912 filming. So these shots where you see the water rushing by Leo and Fabrizio on the bow were created by Jim on a Luma crane, back panning the camera to create the illusion that the water was moving.
And this is a technique that Jim's used in a lot of his movies, is a wonderful use of the moving camera. And when we had shots with Leo and Denny Nucci on the bow of the ship wasn't moving, but the illusion is that it's moving because Jim has the camera moving, and sometimes a very rough fashion to make it look like the ship is rising and falling as it plows through the ocean. But certainly that horizontal movement of the camera creates a horizontal movement of the ship as the background seems to move past the camera.
What sort of brought everything together was this shot that we came up with, and we turned to Digital Domain to do it. And they did a fabulous job, and it expressed the exuberance that anybody must have felt being on this great ship on this beautiful day sailing in the North Atlantic.
Moving object ever made by the hand of man in all.
We had to find actors that we could cast who were great dramatic actors, but who resembled the characters, because it was very important to Jim that we have historical touchstones throughout the movie. And Jonathan Hyde and Bruce J. Ismay could certainly have been brothers.
Ismay was so proud of the ship. I mean, he inspected all the little details, all the crockery and cutlery and napkins and toothbrush holders, everything. He wanted everything to be absolutely, it was his own form of perfectionism.
There are a lot of little moments in the scene. Cal ordering for Kate, her pulling her cigarette away, and a few moments of her, defiance as well when she blows smoke in her mother's face. That all just sell how completely controlled by him she was. You get the situation really very early on.
Was it you, Bruce?
Well, yes, actually. I wanted to convey sheer size.
Titanic was remarkable kind of folie de grandeur, no doubt, people probably say. Nature won, man nil in that particular encounter. And one of the fancy film journals took exception to my only improvised line that Jim allowed to stay in the movie, and I thought that was a bit rum. And I thought, well, come on. I didn't think that was such a bad line. I thought it was a good line.
Freud, who is he? Is he a passenger?
So one of the largest segments of population on Titanic was the Irish population. These are, again, the important touchstones for you to establish early on to relate to later during the sinking. And it was very important that we have a central character that represented that. And here you have Jason Barry playing Tommy Ryan. And again, he brought that excitement about going to the new world that was so representative of so many Irish people who were on the Titanic.
This is the opening scene for my character, and I think it's an interesting scene because it's where I meet Leo and Danny for the first time. It's about young people saying hello to each other on a ship. We're all moving, to a new country, trying to make a better life for herself. And then he sees Kate there, and it's the class divide. He's an idealistic character. He wants to better himself as much as I do.
Again, looking at these two characters here, I think you can see why, for Jim, during the casting process, it was so important that you cast two people where you could believe this is a first love.
I love Kate's second look back to him. In spite of herself, she can't help but look again. This is such a beautiful moment between them. I think this tells you how impossible their love is. And they're close, but they're so incredibly far away from each other.
I saw my whole life.
The first-class dining room. This set was built to scale. You would go in there and you were transported back into 1912. From the lead glass windows, to the piano, to the food that was being served, to the china on the tables with the White Star insignia. But to Rose, all of that meant nothing.
To pull me back. No one who cared. Or even
This scene that we're coming up to, what we call the suicide scene, that was one of the trickier scenes to shoot. Not because of the logistics of creating the water down below or anything like that, but we ended up shooting that scene over a number of different nights spread throughout the schedule. And the actors had to bring themselves back into the moment outside where we shot connected with the ship, where you see Kate running and actually coming to the railing, on the stage with against green screen, on the stage with a black backing, any number of times.
That was frustrating because it just went on and on and on. And I had to, and because I had to be crying so much in that scene, as an actor, there's only a certain number of times that you can keep coming up with that before you've just dried up. So they had to sort of blow this like camphor stuff in my eyes to make them sort of water, and that really stung and really hurt, and I didn't like that much at all. And yeah, it was very fragmented, and it was difficult from an acting point of view. It was very hard because I was never staring out at open ocean or even a tank of water. I was staring out at grips and sparks walking by and green screen and green crash mats and everything green. So it was really difficult to just kind of keep your focus for what was a very important scene.
And again, we had to, work on the digital water down below, because this is a shot right here that we shot, on our exterior set, and there was nothing down below but gravel.
Back. Don't come any closer.
Come on. Just give me your hand. I'll pull you back over.
How do you approach a woman who's hanging off the stern of Titanic? And Leo found a way to do it.
I think this is probably one of the most unusual ways a man and woman have ever met each other in a feature film. She's attempting suicide, and he's got to figure out a way to talk her back over without
tell me what I will and will not do. You don't know me.
causing her to let go.
You would have done it already.
You're distracting me. Go away.
I can't. I'm involved now.
This is another scene that illustrates what a great job Deborah Scott did in selecting a wardrobe that in a night exterior scene still, distinguishes the character and her mood at the moment. Blood red.
I'm not saying it wouldn't.
The dress that we called the suicide dress was the one that was the most copied out there in the public, I think. People really love that. And actually, a funny story about that dress was how it was created was I had found a single piece of beading on net, black jet beads in this circular pattern on a little strip of net, and I fell in love with it. And I said, okay, that's the inspiration. And there were a lot of things like that about the movie. And I took that little design, and of course I had to recreate it a couple of times and, figure out how to place it on a
Up
dress.
there near Chippewa Falls. I remember when I was a kid, me and my father.
Of course, all of this ties to what goes on later. Tells us how cold the water is and what really will happen to those 1,500 people who end up indeed going into the water when Titanic actually sinks. Well, I also think this is one of the very few factual errors in the film. There's a reference here to a lake that did not exist in 1912. We found out about that after the film was released, and some audience members wrote in to correct this error.
At least not about
I think, one of the challenges that we had was convincing Leo to play this part, because Leo traditionally had played parts that had a character flaw. Gilbert Grape, for example, or Romeo in Romeo and Juliet. And here he's playing, an everyman. And this scene, I think, represented him having to play in a very understated way. And it was something we shot relatively early in our schedule, and he did a phenomenal job of doing that and be able to convey the very complex issues of his character in a very understated way.
You don't want to do this.
Well, he's the solid and certain guy that has to be the catalyst for change in Kate. Kate's character, Rose. It's a very different role from anything he'd ever played before.
And just when you think everything's okay.
Oh, it can't be okay, John. She's got to slip.
She had made the decision to come back on board, and fate almost ripped that away from her.
Listen to me. I've got you. I won't let go.
The crew members hear the screams. They come running up on deck, just as Jack gets her over the railing and sees him on top of her on the ground.
A steerage boy on top of a first-class lady. And, there's no question in their mind what must be going on here.
What's all this? You stand back and don't move an inch! Fetch the master at arms!
And here we're not only, we see Billy Zane as Cal, but we're also introduced in the background subtly to Archibald Gracie.
And his brandy snifter. She never goes anywhere without.
It was an accident.
An accident?
It was.
The casting of Billy was interesting. We had not made the decision about Billy until we were up in Halifax. And after one day of filming, Jim and I went to a theater that we had rented, and we saw a movie, Phantom. And saw Billy in that, and Jim made the decision based on that was the direction he was going to go, and cast him in the role.
Not mix. Was that the way of it?
It was such a pleasure. You got to rise to the occasion. And maybe that's challenging in its own right, but, I set the tone of my working relationship with Jim as very playful and inventive. And it got to the point where that was, a blessing and a curse. And when it came time to work, he would basically start every scene going, okay, what do you got, Zane? Oh, shit. Okay. Right. Let's see. I'm working with this. We got that, and we got this. Okay. And if he'd chuckle, I know we were onto something. It just became, the tone was set whereby he just knew I'd come up with something, if not just for our pleasure and entertainment, then something that could actually be practical and work in the scene, and he could either mine it or not. And I guess that was the challenge. But it didn't crackle with anything particularly heavy or daunting. It was always filled with great whimsy, magic, you know? It was all an invitation to dance.
Can I, bum a smoke?
You want to tie those?
This scene between Jack and Lovejoy sets up a relationship that plays out over several beats over the course of the movie.
I don't think you ever really liked Cal. And he is what he is. He's a man of property. She's his property. That's made clear very early on. And you know what fate awaits her if she continues down the path of least resistance.
Cal was just a product of bad programming. He wasn't a bad person. He was just an example of, of flawed system forged by fathers and forefathers that, suddenly landed in his lap at a time of unavoidable social upheaval and shifts, in art, in business, in, commerce and labor. And Cal was just caught out, he was just spent too much time invested in an archaic system.
I think you do see what Cal is all about in this scene. How he views himself, how he sees Rose, at least, if she were to be with him, she would by definition be royalty.
And there's nothing he would deny her.
That's right. You also see the life of luxury and comfort that awaits her, how easy a choice that would be for so many women living in 1912 or 2005 for that matter. But obviously Rose wants more, which is fairly unheard of in her day. You're rooting for her to break free, which was not an easy thing for a young woman to do in 1912.
For like 5 days, me and Leo and Jim just talked through the script. And by this point, Leo had done some serious homework and research about Titanic and about not only the ship, but things that happened on board. For example, a lot of the people in Steerage would shoot dolphins off the side of the boat. He had discovered this, and he just thought this was like, a horrible thing, but also just a filmically an interesting piece of information, but something that was factual too. So Leo started to want to put some of these things into the film and just make it not so sort of sickly sweet and predictable. He wanted to shake it up a little bit and rough up the edges, which I actually kind of agreed with.
For pulling me back, but for your discretion.
This is a scene that had several different evolutions. It was actually a scene that we screen tested with when we did the screen tests, but Jim rewrote this scene the day before we were going to shoot the scene and handed it to the cast members on the day we were shooting the scene. And they were presented with new dialogue for a 6+ page scene.
It was everything.
Leo and I together, in fact, had come up with this idea that perhaps the scene on the deck when it's the scene when Jack and Rose are meeting after the night that he has saved her life and said, you don't want to jump, and that whole scene. And they're talking on the deck, and she says, you don't know what it's like, and I'm engaged, and shows him the engagement ring, and I can't remember the exact dialogue now, but Jack turns to Rose and says,
"Do you love him?"
Pardon me?
Do you love?
She says, "Excuse me?" He says, "Well, do you love the guy or not?" I mean, it's a simple question. Now, the fight to get that into that scene began in this room. Jim was not happy with the fact that Leo and I thought it would be interesting to have a little bit of the bittersweet quality to this relationship. It couldn't all be so predictable. It was too on the nose to have, the rich girl meet the poor guy, and it all ended in hearts and flowers, and they just fell in love with each other gazing across, the deck of a ship. We wanted it to be more edgy than that. So we started to have this conversation with Jim, and he sat there going,
You were leaving.
And he probably just thought to himself, here are these two young actors, I was 20, Leo was 21. And sort of who did we think we were, coming in and having our ideas about this script that Jim had been writing for years? and had worked incredibly hard on. And I can see how that would have been very irritating. But Leo and I quietly never gave up that fight to just get a little bit of that in there. And lo and behold, it's there. We got it into the movie. However, it didn't make its way into the movie until the day that we were shooting that scene. And in fact, my dialect coach on that movie, Susan Hegarty, who I've since worked with twice on Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, and just recently she prepped me for another movie I did, All the King's Men. And she said, God, don't you remember that day when you were shooting that scene with Leo on the deck of the ship? And Jim came to you with 8 pages of dialogue. And we had these 8 new pages on the day. And she said, God, what did we do? And I said, I remember exactly what we did. We said, right, we're going to go back to the dressing room. We're going to sit down. We're going to learn it. We're going to do it. We're going to nail it. We're going to get out there and we're going to make this work. Because, after all, Leo and I have been fighting for this for months. And, it was one of the little battles that we won, which was quite satisfying.
This was actually a positive thing, because in his rewriting, he had taken into consideration a number of concerns that both Kate and Leo had expressed and specific notes that they'd given them. So I think at the end of the day, all 3 were very happy with this scene, even if it was sort of a 12th hour delivery.
Again, just from a production standpoint, though, what Jim did here in this sequence is we had a crane off of the ship that was blowing smoke in the same direction that the wind would blow it back over the ship. So you have the dappling of light while they sit here and talk. That again suggests to you not only do you have the wind blowing, but the smoke going overhead, dappling the different shadows, giving the illusion that the ship is underway. And this scene shows that the drawings are more to Jack than just pictures, that they represent human lives. And again, that's something that Rose is not used to. It's not about material things. It's actually about the people and their lives and who they are and where they come from.
This is a great moment where he tells her she wouldn't have jumped. He just cut to the quick of it.
And?
The absolute essence of her.
You wouldn't have jumped.
And he's right. She's a survivor.
I think Frances Fisher was able to encapsulate so well the aristocratic qualities of first-class lady who puts herself on such a high plane. She's even above Molly Brown, who's another first-class passenger.
I felt so terrible being mean to Kathy because I liked her so much. And I thought that her choice, her reaction to my snub was so brilliant because it was not what one would expect. It just showed me what a great actress she is, always making unusual choices.
No, I don't see the need.
This scene between Captain Smith and Bruce J. Ismay is based on surviving passengers who heard the 2 gentlemen having this exact or very close to a conversation.
Ismay, I think, rather unfairly has been characterized as a sort of villain of the piece, that he was thoroughly irresponsible in pressing Captain Smith to go faster through this quite dangerous ocean at that time of year and everything.
Ismay pressures Captain Smith to speed up, set records, make headlines, which of course is a line that comes back later in a very powerful way.
Well, after that, I worked on a
magic hour, sunset, always a tricky time. How do you complete a whole sequence in the same lighting motif? But it was very important to Jim that scenes like this take place at that magic hour. So you have that fantastic light on the characters. And this scene, I think we, again, bridged over several different days in order to get one similar lighting motif across all the different angles.
I believe we shot it 3 days in a row, not just for the sunset, just for the light, because Jim wanted to have the actual light of the sun. And so we would change our clothes and run up to the deck right at sunset. And it looks as if it was shot all in one day.
The day that we shot this famous spitting scene where Kate and Leo spit off the side of the ship, they were actually spitting into a parking lot, and there was actually no water right below the ship, but we had a bunch of equipment down there. And we'd continue on with the scene, and then when it got to the actual spitting, Leo looked over the side of the boat, and down in the parking lot was the caricature as a target that Leo was pretty happy to use.
Well, I just remember thinking that I wasn't really a very good spitter. So how, Leo had to teach me how to spit. He's going, no, you've got to go. I'm going, desperately trying to do it. I remember Tina Ranchel mixing up this egg white. Because Jim wanted a little bit of it to be on either my chin or Leo's chin, I can't remember which. And she was mixing up this egg white so that it would be dotted on the chin. So that when he turned back to camera, when Frances Fisher, who was playing my mother, walks in, there's spit on his chin. I remember it being quite funny and sort of fun, amusing.
Molly Brown could relate to Jack because Molly Brown wasn't born into first class. She found her way there through life and sort of had an understanding of what it was like not to have all the accoutrements of first class.
Molly Brown was a very kind of irreverent sort of character, and I think in real life was probably more flamboyant than she appeared in the film. You could take that suit and put it on probably somebody else and have it be very sedate, but Kathy Bates has this incredible, lively, rambunctious sort of character and, worked off the costume worked off her. It was a lot of fun because she could do the feathers and the furs and the big hats. And it was really mostly the way that she inhabited the character that was really, really amazing. That's really an actress at work there more than the costume.
It was a kick to work with Leo, with this kid who everybody was so excited about. I had seen his earlier work and I liked so much Gilbert Grape and I thought he was such a fantastic actor. So it was kind of fun to be around him and to see his work, and he just transforms.
It was two completely different experiences on Titanic, depending upon whether or not you were among the privileged or among, the immigrants making their way to America. And here he was seeing firsthand the other Titanic that was completely off limits to him under any normal circumstances.
I remember we were building the staircase. I said that, if the staircase was in oak, then we should build it in oak. Jim was very adamant that when he went down onto Titanic, with the ROV, he did get lower, and the bits of paneling still existed. So it meant that the oak paneling that they had, after all those years, was still there. So it seemed like a good idea that we should do it. The bit that still sticks in my memory is when Jack comes down to dine with first-class passengers, and he's standing by the column. There's an oak column, but there's no doubt about it. It's the real thing.
It was Leo's close-up, looking down from Kate onto Leo as he looks up to smile. And they're getting ready to shoot, and Jim goes, wait, there's a black spot on the floor. So? It's on Leo. No, it's over his shoulder. There's a black spot, and this is a new ship. Nobody's ever walked on it before. And we had shot a scene previously where all the background was walking through, and there was a scuff mark on the floor, but should not have been there for that night. And so he called for one of the crew to, wipe it up. It's like waiting, time. So he ran somewhere off the set, grabbed some kind of cleaning agent and a brush, and got down on the floor himself, on his hands and knees, and started scrubbing it. And he just looked up, and I'm like, oh, Jim, you're the director. What are you doing? He goes, I've worked every job on a set. I know how to get things done.
At this point, Rose's mother was buttering up to Cal. There was some tension between Rose and Cal at the time, and Frances just took his arm and led the way. Again, being the controlling mother, I think that Rose was in a situation where her mother was always taking the lead and always putting her in situations and expecting her to follow the course that she had set. And in our story, she does the exact opposite.
At the time, I think it would be completely appropriate for Cal to escort the mother of his fiancée and expect the fiancée to just follow. I mean, she was simply an attachment to both of them.
And throughout these scenes, we didn't just build costumes for it. We went out and searched vintage shows throughout the country, throughout the world, and found actual period garments, and it added to the authenticity of these scenes.
The research, it was so important because you knew you were recreating not only an era, a period, but a real life event that had been very well documented. And we had pictures plastered all over the office. You know, we had research from different countries and first class and fashion and photo research and history, and then just trying to piece together all of the real life characters and who was playing them and what they should look like. And just sitting there one night really late, really exhausted, and kind of looking up and thinking, gosh, you know, this isn't just research. These were real people's lives.
What's wonderful about the scene is that you're introduced to so many of the historical characters who were actually on Titanic.
Nice to see you.
John Jacob Astor had one of the most incredible stories. He was traveling with his very young wife, who was pregnant with his child, and he is one of the very few first-class gentlemen who perished on the ship. I believe he was the wealthiest man on the ship, but he put his pregnant wife on a lifeboat and went down with Titanic.
When we were shooting the dinner scene, which feels like months to shoot, and I remember walking in, and there were all these extras all dressed up, and it was so eerie. The sense of detail was so cute. There really wasn't much to do. You just had to sort of talk, and it was like you were there. And James was on everything. I mean, everything.
You go on a set like that, and you're there. Do you know what I mean? You're actually, it's as if they got the real Titanic dining room and it was just full of a film crew.
It was amazing. You turn over a cup and there's the White Star stamp just in case, you know, someone sees the bottom of your dish.
We had real beluga caviar, too. That was what was amazing. Jonathan Hyde said, I think I'm going to make Ismay a pig. I'm eating caviar all day long. And he ate that caviar for 2 days. And it was real. It just mounds of it.
It was Savruga. I love caviar. I think it's really a wonderful thing to enjoy. So I made an on-the-spot decision that Ismay was a big eater. It hardly features in the movie. These things rarely ever do. But, you know, I was wolfing the stuff down. I didn't exactly sort of throw it on the plate. But I reckon after a week I was still ready for more. I was far from a busted flush as far as the caviar was concerned.
The beluga caviar was one of the few instances where maintaining authenticity might have cost more money. For the most part, building plates that had the White Star logo or cutlery that had the insignia on it, or the actual chairs that matched what was actually on Titanic, didn't cost us any additional money. We had to build those things anyway. Why? Because we were sinking them and we were ruining them. We couldn't buy them and then return them to a rental company.
Right. So if you're going to build something, you might as well build it right.
It was the most, immersible and surreal experience where, you pull a 360 at any given moment and you were back in time. You couldn't help but be transported.
That's what it felt like. It didn't feel like a set at all. It felt like we were kind of, they just said, location manager said, I've got the Titanic, and we've got the dining room for like maybe 3 or 4 hours or 3 or 4 days. So, that's where we're going to be this week, kind of thing, And it was a bit like that. The detail was just extraordinary.
You don't really know from the past, what colors were popular or what people were wearing or what color combinations in particular. Luckily, we're in a period where there was photographic research, and there's a mass amount of it. There's a massive amount of photographic research about the Titanic in specifically. But you start to look at it, and of course, it's all black and white. And it wasn't really until I started to get these authentic garments shipped to me that you not only the opulence of the period, but the color combinations and the vibrancy of the clothes where it was outstanding. I mean, it was just, you get these things that were purple and fuchsia and green and, brilliant, intense dyes. And also hats with actual, almost full on complete birds. So, it's just like, oh my gosh, and just everything displayed to its splendor. I mean, just amazing period in clothing.
I mean, the scenes themselves were elegant and fun. The acting bits around when Leo wins the table over. It's just wonderful, wonderful stuff. Kathy Bates, it was just a dream to shoot.
And here, Ruth looks over and sees the last thing she wants to see, which is her daughter cavorting with a third-class passenger.
But happy that he's gone. I think both Ruth and Cal are fairly confident that they've got Rose under control at that point in time. Everything's about to change. I think what's so wonderfully refreshing about Jack is how comfortable he is with his state in life. His little joke about rowing with the other slaves. He doesn't feel any need to be one of them.
This scene is really a precursor to the end of the movie, where Leo's waiting on the top of the steps for Kate to arrive.
You want to go to a real party?
Here's stark contrast to the formal setting of the first-class dining room to the third-class, steerage hold, where they're down there, the Irish band is playing, they're celebrating, and
they're having fun.
The Irish band's a fun little story, which is Randy Gersten, our music supervisor, was given the challenge of finding a band that could play the Irish band, and he heard there was a huge Irish festival out in Arcadia at the racetrack out there. And he went out, spent the whole day scouring around, didn't find anybody, was heading back to his car when he heard this rhythmic music playing. It was the last sound he heard before he got in his car, and he turned around and went back and found the band Gaelic Storm. And they're the band who ends up being in the movie. I think shooting this scene was certainly fun for the cast members. It was not without hard work, however. This was all needed to be tightly choreographed for not just the principals, but also for the background, dancers. Lynn Hockney was our etiquette coach, was also our choreographer.
Kate was amazing because she worked extremely hard and long hours on the film, and I was getting to despair. Was I ever going to get her to teach her the dance steps? And I had put some clogging in there because I felt that would suit Jack's character. I eventually got her on a Sunday morning. And it was the Sunday before we shot, in fact. And she was like a sponge. She just soaked up all the information. She got it like that. Leo worked very hard on it, and I thought he did an excellent job. We would do 10-minute increments with Leo. Whenever he had a chance, I would go to his dressing room in the dressing room block, and we'd do a quick bit of clogging. And he seemed to remember he got exhausted very, very quickly and would want to lie down. I'd have to say, "Get up, Leo. Do it again." And Leo had a lizard. I seem to remember he had a pet lizard that he kept in his room, which I loathed. And I would have to knock on his door and say, "Put the lizard away, please, or else I'm not coming in." Which really, I think, suited him, because I don't think he really wanted to rehearse the dancing very much. But can't do all that clogging without rehearsing it, and he did a very good job in it.
It's a little bit like modern breakdancing, where, one's trying to top the other here on the dance floor. But it was a scene where people just got to feel free and enjoy and smile. And
there was no water involved.
And very little inhibition. Again, in the contrast to the formal setting of Hal in the first-class smoking lounge with the other gentlemen.
They were not drinking ale, although they probably would have had more fun if they had been.
That was root beer, and it was nice the first time. By the end of the night, my teeth were just sticky, and I couldn't sleep. I was as high as a kite, because we don't have root beer back in England.
And it was fun to be working with the actors that were playing those parts, because I didn't get to hang out with them that much. So, I did obviously offset, but to just be in a scene with them was just great. It was a really nice, it was just light relief. It was good. That was my favorite stuff, I think.
So here all the men are showing off their brute strength, and Rose is going to turn around and show them another talent that is uniquely hers.
A talent which we never confirmed was actually possible, which is standing on your toes without toe shoes.
But it's certainly possible when you do it the way we did, which is to have her on wires.
Right, with a little assist.
That we then remove digitally.
Yeah, but there was some debate about whether or not anybody could possibly do that.
Here comes trouble. Lovejoy.
A great name for that character, Lovejoy.
Should be Killjoy.
Exactly.
In the Titanic band that you see there were great musicians. We'd jam on our days off. We'd all get our instruments and start playing Oasis songs. This was fun. This was as much fun filming as it looks. I mean, it took a long time and it was work, but we were having a good time.
I remember being nervous about that scene because it was one of the specific scenes, performance-wise, that had to be really bang on because it really showed the kind of person that Cal had the potential to be, but more importantly, it showed the impact that that had on Rose and her life and the kind of mess that she was in internally. And I sweated over that scene. I remember really worrying about it and wanting it to be right. But it was, you know, it was like every other scene on Titanic. It was technical. There were props. There was breakaways. There was smashes. There was always something that had to be reset and always took forever. And it was hard to remain sort of focused through those resets because sometimes, you know, an hour would go by and you're waiting to go back and do the same thing with the same energy and the same pace and remembering your lines sometimes too, which could often be tricky when there was so much else going on.
You know, on a big production, sometimes it's the smallest things that can hang you up. Here we are shooting the breakfast scene in which Hal dumps over the table. And it turns out because of a delay in getting our props from Mexico City that we didn't have enough plates for the table. We felt that we could maybe get by with 3 takes before we would run out of plates. You know, they knew that Jim would be none too happy. Fortunately, right after the 3rd take, in came some of our great Mexican prop people who had quickly unloaded the truck as it arrived and got the props onto the set just in time for take 4, take 5, take 6, 7, 8.
So much was finished, done, delivered just when we needed it.
This is a scene that wasn't originally scripted the way it ended up in the movie either.
Originally, Rose was to be corseting Ruth in Ruth's stateroom.
In the audition scene, you know, she was supposed to be putting the corset on me because that's how it was written. And as we were getting ready in the makeup room, Kate and I were in the mirror and we almost at the same time looked at each other and went, you know what? I don't think you would be putting the corset on me. And she said, I agree completely because, you know, you're already dressed and she's more vulnerable. The daughter is more vulnerable. She's the one who's being, you know, symbolically kept in. And we went, yeah, of course. And well, maybe we should say something to Jim. And as soon as we walked on the set, Jim came up to me and goes, you know what, girls, I've been thinking, I think we should reverse it. Kate should be getting into the corset. And we went, great. You know, that's really how it was. It was so seamless, effortless.
Ruth, who's trying to attach herself via her daughter to the Hockley fortune, I think it's much more symbolic this way. And it saved us building or at a minimum, redressing a set.
This scene is the reason I wanted to do this movie. I mean, to work with Jim Cameron is one thing. Surprising that he would write a movie like this because he's the sci-fi guy. But for him to write a scene that is so delicate was wonderful. This is one of the first scenes that Kate and I did together. It was kind of my trial by fire with Jonathan Hyde watching off camera. The thing that young girls would say most to me was, how could I be so mean as this character? But the thing that young people don't understand, at this period of time, women didn't even have the right to vote. There weren't any options for women back then. You were either a nurse or a school teacher or you were a streetwalker. So the pain that Ruth is feeling is that her daughter is not going to be able to live a safe life, have the money she needs, and be taken care of, because that was the only thing that women could do.
The film left Southampton with European aristocracy and 1 or 2 very famous Americans on it. So the majority of the population of the ship were European Caucasians. We were filming in Mexico. There's a slight ethnographic challenge going on there. So we brought down a lot of people from San Diego to play those parts. But of course, the accent clearly didn't quite ring true. And the particular day when they were singing For Those in Peril on the Sea, with very, very strong American intonation.
Hello, Jack.
I arrived at the set to see casting, costume, and the hairdressers, and became third officer pitman, singing and leading singing with For Those in Peril on the Sea. Then, to everyone's sort of kind of amusement, I'd regularly appear on the call sheet in costume third officer pitman. It's pretty hot in Mexico. They were quite often filming at night, but I would have to then get in costume and walk around as third officer pitman, doing my proper job, and then quickly come to the set, stand here, and work.
I think David really successfully personified the wall that existed between these two characters' worlds. He was the enforcer, and he represented the wall that society at that time had built between the privileged and the underclass, which Jack is really a member of. He personified the impossibility of their love in a very tangible way, in a way that you couldn't have Cal do, because Cal had to play the role of a gentleman. So you needed a Lovejoy. You needed a Lovejoy to really say it the way it was, which was, there is not a chance in hell, Jack Dawson, that you are going to have a relationship with that woman. It won't happen. And Jack just wasn't going to take no for an answer.
The boy playing with the top is inspired by a famous photo that actually survived from Titanic, or didn't survive, but was actually taken off the ship when it docked, I believe, in Cherbourg, of a little boy playing with the top on the deck.
And with the number of lifeboats times the capacity you mentioned, forgive me, but it seems that there are not enough for everyone aboard.
And there you have the butterfly comb that old Rose was looking at the beginning of the film.
And one of the things that came into play here, we were very fortunate that Harlan Wolff, the original builders of Titanic, had reached a point where they were willing to share previously unrevealed information, including Thomas Andrews' original book of notes. And in reading it, that's where we discovered that at one time they had planned 2 rows of lifeboats, enough to get all the passengers off.
This is a wonderful scene when Leo says everything we've kind of been thinking all along. I think the real balance that had to be struck here was in not being too on the nose.
And it was a balance Jim had to find during the editing process. And there's some great lines that sometimes don't make it into a movie, because despite the line being great, the scene is better without that line. And there are moments from this scene that I love that were cut out, but the scene as a whole was ultimately better.
And I remember you fighting vehemently for those lines, but I think Jim was really right. I mean,
I've got $10 in my pocket.
Jack gets his point across without beating it over the head.
One of the lines, in particular that I remember, and it sort of related to the comb and everything, and sort of, to me, tied everything together and represented what she was, that she was a butterfly flapping in a jar, and that she was contained in that jar, and you had to let that butterfly out. And I thought that was such a beautiful and graceful image, that here he looked at this young woman as that beautiful butterfly, and he wanted to open that jar for her.
It's a beautiful metaphor, but he'd said it all.
And I think we've all had this similar moment where there's somebody that we look at and we want to, come and rescue them, and this is his attempt, Jack's attempt to do that for her. Yes, he saved her from committing suicide, but this is the moment where he's really looking to save her life and change her life.
But I think he's done what he can do, and now it really has to be up to her. And I think that was where the dialogue as originally scripted went a little too far. You have to let Rose make a choice now.
This is an interesting set. Actually, it's not a set. It's a quarter-scale model, which is the environment, and we shot the actors in front of a green screen and placed them into the model. We did this in order to save building a set that was over $250,000.
I thought that was a very poignant scene because these children, these little girls and boys, were in straitjackets at that time. Spontaneous behaviour was strictly out. Everything they did had to be thought about beforehand. And I thought that scene showed very well how Rose felt.
This scene here, where we were lucky enough to get one of the most spectacular sunsets I've ever seen, but it also presented its own problems because we were only able to get one shot with that sunset.
Kate and Leo at the bow, beautiful shot. We'd set it up to shoot just as the sun was setting. And it's a race against time because the sun's going down. So Jim does his pass, shoots it, it looks absolutely beautiful. Then the next day, Jim wanted to have additional coverage. So we waited and we waited, but the sunset was never the same. So the decision came to build a set on stage where we'd actually get a big backing, spread it around the whole set, and paint it to match the sunset that we'd shot previously in the week. So because the stage was a lot smaller, it meant that we could actually build part of the bow full size, but the bridge and the forecastle and all the bits that would come behind Kate and Leo, we had to reduce down in size and in scale. So here we are on the day that we're about to shoot this. Jim comes in, he puts Kate and Leo on the bow, and then he turns to me and says, "Where's Captain Smith?" And I said, I don't know. And he said, "Well, Captain Smith was on the bridge on the day that we shot this. I need Captain Smith." So I went to one of the prop guys and I grabbed his black sock, because the captain's had a black capacitate, and then got some white paint and put Captain Smith's beard on my hand. So I went running up onto the bridge. I lay down very, very low behind the set and then popped my hand out, and I was Captain Smith. I was a little bit disappointed when I saw the film to see that my glove puppet hand, Captain Smith, in the course of perfection, they'd actually put a real Captain Smith in there as well.
But we did so many tries at that because Jim wanted to shoot it, with the real sunset behind us, which we got several times, really great. And then we had to do a load of CGI, so we had to do it later, on this hydraulic platform. And we must have had 4 or 5 tries at it. So we were just so over it in the end. One of the resounding images of the movie is that kiss, and we were like, oh, God, so over this scene. But it was pretty funny. And Leo and I would have this agreement where if ever we had to do any kissing, we would say, okay, we won't smoke, no onions, no garlic, no coffee. Okay, deal. And he would go and do everything right before the kissing. And I would go, let me smell your breath. Oh, God. I mean, it was just pranks that we played.
The idea of the in-camera trick is, Jim's use of basically they're stationary and the camera is just ripping around them and they're backpanning like crazy, creating the illusion that the water is moving. And the thing that was sort of fascinating about it was one of those transition shots is that used the same idea that when the ship started to transition and become the wreck, still wanted to get the sensation that the ship was moving by having basically the back pan and devised the shot. So he'd back pan once it becomes the ship and you see just the remnants of water going by. And it feels like the ship underwater is actually still traveling when it's really not. It's really the same illusion that Jim created in the shots prior.
This set we shot up in Halifax in a warehouse just off of the dock where we docked the Keldysh. And again, we had a whole series of events up in Halifax that we could not foresee, including something that has been referred to ever since as the chowder incident. Somebody spiked our food with PCP, and a large portion of our crew got sick, and were taken to the hospital.
1:30 in the morning, we have 20 hours of work to do, the last day in Halifax with 8 hours to go.
And Jim looks around and says, "Hell, let's break for lunch." We all sit down, we're eating, and suddenly it was just surreal.
I'm seeing colors and fog.
People were freaking out. I'm like, what's going on?
The genius himself started to feel it too. Next thing you know,
Jim's like, oh, this is like some toxic fish food poisoning.
He stands up and calls for the AD and storms off the set.
Josh is like, okay, something's going on here. Okay, good crew here, bad crew here. And he's like separating people. And I remember Caleb Deschanel, the cinematographer for that portion of the film, was like, I don't know if I'm one of the good or bad.
Meanwhile, I'm being led to a 16-passenger van by guys in orange suits.
The small local Halifax hospital suddenly gets bombarded by these Hollywood people who are acting crazy.
People doing the conga line. So they put us all in different rooms and we're all sticking our heads out because we want to be with each other. And you would hear, "Get back in your room."
Louis Abernathy saw it and said, "Looked like something from Gone with the Wind."
And everybody has their theories on, who it might have been who laced the chowder. But
the irony of it all was that's the one time Jim decided to break early and actually have lunch.
Their first scene together.
It was the first day Leo worked.
The first day Leo worked, he had to sketch Kate nude.
Yeah, the sketching scene was done, I think it was Leo's first day. And I remember thinking, well, this is a icebreaker. But I was really glad to get it out of the way, to be honest. And what better way to get to know somebody, I suppose. But I remember him being brilliant, actually. He was very kind of unfazed by it. And I remember we were doing the body makeup in the makeup room in sort of actors' quarters that had been built for us. And I heard Leo coming down the corridor, whistling and making general sort of Leo noises. And he was looking for Sean, his makeup artist, who was in the makeup room with me. And I turned around to them and I went, "Unlock the door." And they were like, no. And I said, "Unlock the door quickly." So they quickly unlocked the door and he walked straight in and boom, there I was, completely starker, standing there, with my legs apart and my arms in the air, getting my body painted. And I just thought, well, I'd rather this moment was here in the dressing room, in the makeup room, rather than on set in front of however many other bloody people. But that was quite funny. And, and I think that he was almost relieved, I think, just because he knew that he was working with somebody who just didn't care and just wanted to do a good job and have a good time and have a laugh. Yeah, that was a memorable one.
This scene was something that, Jim really focused on trying to do as artfully as possible because it was very important for us that the movie have a PG-13 rating. And this was the one scene that really pushed those bounds. This moment for Rose's character was so defiant of the world that she lived in. And Leo adding all of the little beats of awkwardness and the flubbed lines and the misspoken double entendres. It created a reality. Again, I think many people viewing the movie could see themselves, if they were forced in this situation, acting and reacting the same way that these two characters did. I mean, the section with James's music, again, is just so lyrical in how it's all put together.
And that's James actually playing the piano.
I'm not a very good pianist, and I played on the piano an approximation of Rose's theme that was probably 85% right. There were no wrong notes in it. It was just probably a little less fleshed out than somebody else might play it. But I played it very simply, and he put it into the sequence to see how it worked, and he loved it. So then comes the day to do the real thing, and I played it again. And whatever the formality was that I brought it the second time, he didn't find it had the same intimacy and gentleness, I guess, that the first one had. So we kept trying. We tried 2 or 3 times. He said, "Forget it. I'm just going to use the first one." And that's what we stuck with.
And again, the moment on Jack's eyes, that's the same eyes that we saw in the flashback at the beginning of the movie. And this sequence ends, again, with the significance of the eyes when we push in on young Rose's eyes and we transition to old Rose today.
My heart was pounding the whole time.
It was the most erotic experience of my life or something like that. We're like teenagers hearing a story that we might hear the climax to.
So what happened next?
You mean, did we do it?
My personal favorite reaction is that one to the line about it was the most erotic moment of my life, kind of being a little embarrassed by it.
At this point, we're almost 90 minutes into the movie, and many movies already done at this point, and we haven't even hit the iceberg. And one of the stories that I tell people is, at our first preview, we went into a situation where we knew that our movie was too long, and we needed the audience to help tell us where it was too long. And the news we got coming out of the preview, and it was the best news we could get, was that they felt that the sinking sequences were what was too long. And that told us that our relationship stories were working. And we focused on trimming mostly during the sinking sequences, although there were trims made earlier. But it allowed us to rest on the moments that really helped define the relationships earlier in the movie. This is a scene that we actually shot on a stage. We shot the bridge both exterior as part of our big ship set and on our stage inside. The other thing we were faced with any time we were on the bridge or out on a deck scene is we only had the ocean on one side of the ship. On the other side, if we were looking out over the ship, you would see the studio. So we had to flop the film in these instances and shoot everything looking out on the water on one side of the ship. So we had the bridge built, and it was really reversible. We could look in one direction and see out to the sea, and in the other direction we'd look at the studio, but we would flop everything inside the bridge and cheat and shoot back at the same ocean and flop the film.
Jim's actually shooting outside the ship, looking up at Leo, who's in the first-class promenade, looking down. It was a great shot. He'd got this big crane, and it was a sweeping move, and he was looking in at Leo. And I was up on the top of the deck of the ship. I got the message from Jim, can you come down? I need you to look at one of the portholes. I'm 80 foot up in the air. He's down on the ground. I come running, sprinting down the staircase, get all the way down, and he says, that porthole over there, which is to the left of where Leo is, I need you to put curtains in there. So I climbed up the scaffolding to about sort of 65, 70 foot in the air, and I found the porthole, and he goes, right, that's it, dress it, make it look perfect, it has to be a room. I'm up there, it's pitch black, and thinking, where on earth am I going to find anything to put up here? After about 5 minutes, I get a message over my walkie-talkie from the first assistant saying, Martin, how are you doing? Have you finished it yet? Have you done anything yet? I was cold, I was tired, and I replied, no, Josh, I'm just up here having a gin and tonic. Immediately, the headset erupts. Jim had heard me say I was having a gin and tonic. So at that point, everything else just drains from your mind. You go cold, and like any good Englishman would, you take your clothes off. So here I am, 70 foot up in the air, freezing cold in the middle of the night. I had nothing but a hammer and a few nails, and I ended up banging my shirt to the back of the set to make it look like there were curtains coming behind this porthole. I then moved to the next porthole, and the trousers come off because there's nothing else. What can I do? I start banging the trousers up to the porthole, and then all of a sudden the panic and the fear that I had was broken by laughter. Over my earpiece, I could hear everybody laughing because, unbeknownst to me, here I was naked at the back of the set, thinking no one could see me, but everyone down on the set could look up through the porthole, and just all they could see was a naked Englishman banging up against the window.
And again, not only are we now in the third class sections, but we now get to really go down into the bowels of the ship when they're forced into a corner and their only way out is through the boiler rooms.
One of the tricks employed to make sets look bigger was, at least in one set, the furnace room, we used a very, very large mirror at the end of the set, and it basically made the set look as though it was twice as long as it was. Then we carefully positioned the camera behind our extras so that you wouldn't notice that the camera or anything was back there. Of course, that meant that all of our lighting had to be done from above, and I decided, and it seemed like a very appropriate source of light, should be the light that was coming out of these huge boilers themselves. And that light actually was some powerful but small lights on flickering dimmers that were shooting through steam. And you could look right into the boiler, and it looked like you were looking into an inferno, but that was just because it was also overexposed. But I enjoyed that motif too, and I enjoyed keeping the light alive and having energy during that scene.
And again, I think, this is why it's this scene that it's so important that you believe that this is their first love, and it's really their, potentially their first time, being with the person. And there's another little moment that was originally scripted in this scene that was cut, but it's one of those moments that I always remember, and which was at the end of them making love. He has his head on her chest, and he talks about hearing her heart beating.
No one thought of it as a chick flick at the time, but we always thought of it as a love story. So it was a big, epic love story. So if there was an overall approach, it was that. That was the most important thing. It was the story of Jack and Rose, and that was the the key to it. Even as the ship was sinking, hitting the iceberg, Jack and Rose were part of the story. So it was a love story first. But what I loved about doing the work for it was how it was both big in a way that a Titanic splitting in half and sinking would be big, but then it was intimate and it was also poetic. There were parts of it that are about memory, about the past, about transitioning to the past, about point of view. And I like that blend in the movie.
We had shot tests with a number of actresses, and after several actresses, Kate Winslet came in, and she gave her reading, and I'm thinking, if this isn't Rose, I don't know who is. Also, besides being a great actress and seeming to possess the role of Rose from the first take on, he had a presence and a command for someone so young that made you think here was somebody rock solid all the way through, and who was going to be consistent in there and true to form from day one to the very end. But I remember when she left, you could look around the room, and I think I looked over and I saw Ray Sanchini, and you could see it in her eyes. You go, if this isn't Rose, who is? And if there was a sense of, there she is, she's appeared. And it was actually from that moment, you felt like, wow, this is really going to be great.
It was right after this moment where he heard her heart beating.
And it's just wonderful to have that moment before really all hell breaks loose.
And you're starting to build tension now. I mean, they're about to be discovered. You set up that Cal has found the drawing. So the stakes are coming up, and we're just in the moments before the iceberg hits. And
yeah, you've seen the lookouts talking about how cold it is. You know it's the night. Everything is building.
This was great. We decided to not tear it up. It was written that I did destroy it, but we liked the fact that you couldn't help but realize that it was good. It's part of realizing Jack's power.
Good job. I think this is a very important moment. I mean, Rose has made her decision. It's she's not going back. She sees her future now. It's with Jack, and they are together.
When the ship docks, I'm getting off with you.
This is crazy.
I know. It doesn't make any sense. That's why I trust it.
When this ship docks, they're getting off together and starting a new life. And of course, we all know tragedy is going to intervene, but they have a moment.
That's what it takes for us to go warm and rather not.
The bell he used for the Titanic was, again, manufactured by the same company that manufactured the bell for the original Titanic. And I said, yeah, well, I'd love to record that bell. I mean, in many regards, you would love it if all films were, in a way, this accurate, because you could then do the research to come up with the right sound. But the difference with Titanic is the scope and massive quantity of sounds that had to be designed made it an incredibly large research project. But back to the bell was a fun one, because when Jim heard that in the mix, he said, "That's not the bell from Titanic, Chris." And that evening, I was in my sound design room working away on some other sounds, and somebody knocked on the door. And I can't remember if Jim was with them. In my memory, I think Jim was with them, but I can't really remember whether or not that was accurate. But nonetheless, in came this bell that must have weighed well over 100 pounds, which had been in Rosarita maybe 8 hours earlier. And Jim had made a call, and that bell was put on the fast track right to me. And, actually, as funny as it sounds, it was just an incredible relief, because I thought, well, now we have the bell from Titanic.
This is the moment where the movie changes from a straight drama into an action drama, and we had to find techniques that would allow us to both tell the narrative story and the action story. And we made the movie at a time when digital technology we were on the cusp of allowing us to combine different techniques, and by pushing the envelope, we were able to do that.
The hitting of the iceberg scene, to me, is a wonderful example of how James Cameron thinks about sound when he designs a movie. Jim's approach to sound is very contrast heavy. He loves to use contrast. Loud, soft, soft to loud. The iceberg hitting scene cuts from the impact of the iceberg, which is very loud, up to the deck where we don't hear it at all. We're with the on the deck, and we see and hear a little rattle of the wheel. Then we cut down to different parts of the ship, always using contrast, always going to first class where it's quiet and we just hear the tinkling of the chandelier, down to the steerage where we hear more of the groaning and the crashing of the iceberg, then to the iceberg puncturing holes in the side of the ship. And always, this was designed to take advantage of contrast so that we're going to different parts of the ship. It's effective from a sound standpoint because we're always getting a big moment, small moment, big moment. We're also telling with sound how big the ship is. We're saying this is a really big ship because we can't hear the iceberg from this section. It's a great example of how Jim uses sound to help tell the story, to be dramatic, and how he thinks about it as he's designing and cutting scenes.
Now here, because we had been to these spots before, we had been to the boiler rooms, we had seen the stokers, we knew where we were during this sequence. And again, these are people that had touched our lives earlier in an environment we were familiar with, in a happy moment, and now we see what really goes on.
The boiler room was just incredible. The attention to detail, the rivets, Martin Lang, Charles Lee, and everybody just did a great job. And I really wanted to show off these boilers and these rivets. But it wasn't designed very well for the flooding sequence because they had no capacity to relieve the water once it sort of poured in. So it was sort of like a real-time thing. Each take we did, it got more and more water. And there wasn't enough time at this point in the production to do resets. So we literally had to just shoot this thing like it was a real live-action documentary approach. And one of the things I did is, for this sequence, my friend Roy Unger was photographing it for me. I just grabbed a camera and he grabbed a camera, and we said, okay, let's just do this like we're really there, sort of a cinema verite handheld approach. And we just shot this thing as the events were happening. And I think in the end, with the way the cut was, it really shows sort of the realism and the grittiness of that sequence. You buy that you're really there and this is all happening. And it was very efficient because we shot that whole sequence in just one day.
When Smith heard of the warnings that were coming down from icebergs floating further south than was normal, that diagonal course, southwesterly course, he took that for an extra half an hour longer to avoid any rogue icebergs, or so he thought. It wasn't anybody's fault. It was just a classic accident.
So here we have a contrast again between first and third class. Third class has already felt the water pouring in, and they're reacting to it. And the first class is up there, saying, "What happened? It's okay. Let's go back to bed."
One of its triumphs is the scenes so interrelate, and the idea of cut to the ice, where it was just going to be an action spectacular, is undermined brilliantly by your identification with the multiplicity of characters. That when that ship set sail, you learned through the film the community of that ship, the class structure of that ship, the nuances of the relationships of all those people on that ship, and then the relationship between the two main protagonists. So when the ice hit, it wasn't so much an action spectacular as a culture spectacular, that this huge edifice that was celebrating all that was cutting edge then, was vulnerable to nature, but at the same time, when you're in freezing water and you're about to drown, all men and women are equal.
This was indicative of the attitude in the minutes after the ship hit the berg. Nobody understood what had happened. Probably nobody except Thomas Andrews, who had an uncanny connection to the ship.
Again, Jim, to build in the dramatics of the iceberg hitting and now the escalation of their personal story where the diamond is planted on Jack, and just as the ship is being hit and that's going down, Jack's going down for a crime he didn't commit. I mean, I think Jim might have set up earlier when Leo first sees the diamond being put back in the safe, what his character might do. But as we get to know Jack, we know it wouldn't have been him. And there was no misdirect here. It was clearly placed in his pocket by Lovejoy as a setup, something that Cal and Lovejoy concocted.
I don't think the audience questioned Jack's character at any point in this film.
Well, what's fortunate, what would help set it up that Rose can't defend him immediately is that Jim set up that this is the jacket that he stole earlier when we saw him climb up to first class before the scene in the gym with Rose.
Which was the only way he could sneak in to see her. Casting Victor Garber was particularly fortuitous. Not only does he bear an uncanny resemblance to Thomas Andrews, but he's extraordinary. We almost didn't get him because of a case of mistaken identity.
We were already in production when Mally Finn, our casting director, called and said that she had found the perfect Thomas Andrews. And she was going to send us down a tape of Victor Garber, who she thought was perfect for this role. We got the tape. Jim and I sat down and began watching it. And as we watched it, we looked at each other and could not see what Mally Finn saw in this actor. He was not very good. Jim went back to work on the set, and I called Mally and I said, Mally, we watched this tape, and this guy Garber, we don't get it. And what was with that ridiculous bow tie he was wearing? And Mally said, what bow tie? And it was at that moment she realized that she had sent us the wrong tape. Well, a day later, we got the tape of Victor Garber, and immediately Jim saw what Mally had seen, and at that moment, there was nobody else who could or should play Thomas Andrews.
Pretty scary business, too, all that, of course. I mean, just to think that your prize asset, your number one possession is
2,200 souls on board.
Heading down to the bottom must be terrifying conclusion. I just remember that.
Well, you believe you may get your headlines, Mr. Ismay.
There were really two actors on the movie who could always break the tension. One was Leo, and the other was Billy. Billy had an incredible sense of humor. He brought to it a very eclectic sensibility of even in the arts. Billy is an artiste. And he would go around the set shooting images of different obscure things, and people had a lot of fun with that.
I turned my garage at this condo into a studio, and just started doing a lot of abstract expressionism, and going very Pollock at the time. I just kept driving. When I would come back from LA, I'd just bring rolls of canvas and tons of house paint. It was rough, I got a little weird out there, but arts and crafts pulled me through.
The whole distress call, there's a historical precedent for how these sequences played out and what signals they sent and what messages were heard.
He wasn't a great seaman, Smith. He was the PR captain, if you like, That was his forte within the fleet. And he got all the prestigious jobs because he looked and played the captain, you know what I mean? So For this all to go terribly wrong probably hit him harder than any seasoned seaman, if you like. So he went into the catatonic state, and I just instinctively thought that that's probably where he'd go. And Jim said, well, I agree.
We had these huge boilers under the set that generated the steam to pour out of the funnels. It wasn't a small undertaking to get the steam out. The davits that you see here starting to lower the lifeboats, we needed to build davits that were safe because we were actually lowering lifeboats with, 30, 40, 50 people in them. And we had to train people on how to work the davits and how to react to all of this. And Simon Crane, our stunt coordinator, did a fabulous job of keeping safety in mind when we were doing sequences that could have been very difficult.
Basically, everything on Titanic was for real. So, but down to the lifeboats, they, on a real ship, they're used to being let down. But the problem for us, for take two, we had to bring them back up as well. And because we had people, the extras in the lifeboats, they weren't all stunt people in the lifeboats, everyone had to go through quite a bit of training. There was a certain knack to doing the lifeboat drill. And what I did in the end was put like a Czech team on one of the lifeboats, put a English team on another, and basically they were seeing who could do it the best and who could do it the quickest. But we had cables on the lifeboats for safety, so it could never go drastically wrong.
And Thomas Andrews knows what's going to happen to the ship. The first-class passengers, the third-class passengers, they don't know. But he shares his knowledge with Rose during the sequence, and her having that knowledge affects how she plays out the rest of the movie.
Sort of a father relationship. I mean, he seems to understand her at a level that the people closest to her, or theoretically closest to her, should.
I remember Kate Winslet and her generosity towards me, and how she'd say to me, is there anything I can do off camera? This is, some other people leave. You do it with a stand-in, but is there anything I can do for you to, I said, and this was really true. All she had to do was look at me, and it was all there in her face. I mean, all I had to do was look at her, and it was truly a great experience working with her.
When we did Jack in the Master at Arms, we had it dry first, then we're going to have it wet, We had to build a little tank, especially for it. Then Jack under the water where he's looking out through the porthole. All these little pieces had to be calculated.
We wanted to make sure it was absolutely precise to the detail of the ship. Jim Cameron would have it no other way.
Jim had this incredible eye for detail and incredible eye for the historical accuracy of the building of the ship and of every component into it. And the sound certainly played a role in that regard. I mean, the davits that, held the pulley mechanism, that was a very specific sound. And my first attempt at that was really pretty light and squeaky. And it was not what Jim remembered hearing when he was shooting the film. And he knew exactly what they sounded like. And he knew exactly how many tons that boat weighed. And that sound absolutely was not accurate. As would happen time and time again, when we would come up to a situation like that, I would have to go off to my sound design room and come up with a new sound that satisfied what he heard in his head. And one of the lead effects editors, Ethan Van der Eyne, and we had one of the pulleys from a ship of the era of Titanic. And we took my old wagon that I had at the time, and we drove it up a road that was literally a dirt road this steep. And we found a metal pole, and we attached this davit to the metal pole. And I put it in neutral, and I just let them winch the car back down the hill. And that's what it took to get the weight and quality of sound that Jim was looking for in that scene.
Jim did a great job of putting characters that we knew in different spots around the ship. We had characters in third class. We had characters, in first class forward on the ship, characters in, the aft of the ship, so that as the audience got to experience what happened in all different sections.
In this scene where the third class passengers are realizing that they're barred from going above deck was the point where I had to decide, you have to listen to what you're told if you're going to survive, or if you listen to what you're told, you're not going to survive. My attention in the scene was really trying to keep my children calm and give them hope that they were going to get out. Unfortunately, for most of the people in the third class, they weren't even allowed to be given a chance to survive.
So lowering the lifeboats, just as it was on the night where the ship actually sank, when we got around to doing it, it was tricky. It's not easy keeping the lifeboats level. And a lot of the fear that you see is what people felt is the lifeboats weren't being lowered, evenly into the water.
Well, it was difficult for the stunt people in that not only did they have to do the stunt, but they had to act quite a lot as well. Basically, if you were English, you were going to be featured in the film and you were going to talk in the film.
I think what's wonderful is that little girl is reacting with awe. I mean, it's cool. It's fireworks. And she has no idea what's really going on.
So here we built a watertight set as part of our exterior big ship set that we then cut into an interior stage where we built the Master-at-Arms office.
We came along, we dropped our crew down into this very, very small room of having Leo looking through the porthole. So this was the second time we'd been in the Master-at-Arms. Once we'd shot it on a soundstage, and this was the second time we reduced everything down much, much smaller and then put it under the level of the water, but kept it dry.
When we actually filmed this set, it was the first time we shot in the water and had to deal with what that meant. And I don't think any of us really understood how difficult it would be to film in water.
Through your imagination, of course, you begin to think about what that would really feel like if you were stepping off of this luxurious ocean liner and climbing into a small dinghy and not expecting this as part of your voyage, and it's the middle of the night and it's cold and, some of the ropes on the davits were slipping, and you begin to think back to that night in 1912 and what people were actually experiencing. And I remember Kate coming up to me and asking me a question about the acting part of it. And she said something to me about, do you have any ideas about this moment, where her fiancé and her mother, Billy Zane and Frances Fisher, are getting into the boat and they want her to come and she doesn't want to come. And I thought about it for a minute and I said to her, well, you're seeing them for the first and the last time. She's seeing them for who they really are for the first time because they're so greedy and pushy and upper crust about it. And she's seeing them for the last time because she's made her choice.
It was scripted that Cal grabs Rose, and to get away from him, she pulls out a hairpin and jabs him with it. I knew that Jim was going to want my hair to be down for the last part of the end of the movie. So I came up with this idea, which is, Jack taught Rose how to spit. She should spit at Cal. This is one thing that, he's given to her and he's left her with, and she's really fundamentally changed completely through meeting this guy and falling in love with him. And look, she can spit. And so I walked onto the set and I remember being really nervous. How do I make this suggestion? And I said to Jim, I just had this idea, because we have a bit of a problem here, Jim, which is that my hair is down. I don't have any hairpins in my hair, but I did have this idea. And he was like, what's that? And I said, well, she should spit at him. And he was like, okay, good call. Good call. And that was as much of a compliment as I got. But I knew he was really pleased with that idea. It was a good moment. It was a very good moment.
I think he's a demanding director, and my impression of him was that he just wanted everyone to be as committed as he was. So that was my instinct, was to just make sure that when I was there on the set that I knew what I was doing and anticipated what he wanted. And so I actually had a great time working with him.
Here's a guy who does 100%. I mean, everybody says 110. It's like you can only have 100% of anything. And Jim does 100%. And he expects everybody else to do it too.
Now, when you start sinking, we had 3 or 4 levels of sink, ankle deep, or just water trickling in. I remember the first time we sunk the interior set, I picked up a camera, ran over just to get a little water trickling in, because once the set is wet and
a little bit. Who knew how I was going to wear? So I just started to follow water around. And she was like, good, good. And started shooting little snippets of that just to have. Obviously, the second unit and Steve Quayle later went in and got as much detail work as he needed. But, Jim's take on life was, look, if we sink something, it may never come back. We got to be rolling on it.
Here was an illustration of how the moving lift actually went down into the water as we were sinking the ship. We're sinking the ship on risers that created the angle. We had a little Waldo device where we would move it on the surface, and the cables would mimic that and actually drop the set on cue, up and down, because we had to be able to repeat this. We had to go to take 2, or as Jim would say, take 12. And the reset time wasn't really, too bad. We had a bunch of prop people with squeegees, and we'd lift the set out of the water and brush the water away and be able to go rather quickly.
For the hallways, we didn't use any of the mirror gags, but we did use a forced perspective piece. Here, what you do is you figure out where the camera height, the camera's going to be, where they're going to be looking, and you figure out the perspective that if you were looking down a normal corridor, how everything disappears off to a point. And we actually built a conical-shaped piece to go at the end of the hallway to make it look like the hallway went on forever. That was a fun piece, but it was difficult because as we flooded the place, the water would come up, and you'd have to try and figure out where the water was going to go so it didn't blow the gag.
Rose, I'm in here!
This was a separate little set on a different, something that we hadn't even planned on using as a stage. When we were behind on the big set, we were forced to convert a warehouse building into a stage, and we built this set on it. And we surrounded it with a steel tank that we built in order to keep the water contained to create the flooding.
There was one point when we were shooting the Master at Arms area where Leo is stuck up against the wall, locked around that big pipe. And Jim came on the set, and he looks out of the doorway at the corridor that's there and says, I think there should be a bit more perspective. So he grabs a paintbrush, wanders over there in his big waders, and paints this beautiful perspective backing right outside the door in a period of 5 minutes. Now, because Jim has come up through the art department and at one point has been an art director, you can't trick him. You can't fool him. He knows exactly what it's about. And in certain cases, he can do it better than all of us. He's an absolute star there, which was very thrilling to see, and it was impressive.
Sound was very important to Jim in this whole sequence. It sold the increasing pressure and the emptiness of this level of the ship at this point in time in the sinking.
A lot of filmmakers and directors try to bridge the area of sound effects and music by having music come closer to sound effects and sound effects come closer to music. Jim Cameron's done that, but he was pretty specific. He didn't want to do that on this movie. He wanted music to be music and sound effects to be sound effects. But one area where we really did go and step in each other's areas with a lot of collaboration is the part where Rose is in the sinking ship and in the hallways and the lights go out. And in that area, we had great fun with the ship groans that were coming from sound effects and our low synthesizers and seeing them blend and making sort of a haunted house moment out of it.
There's a moment in the below deck in a hallway, and there's no windows. We don't see anything. There's nothing visually telling us the ship is sinking. The lights go off. And we're left in the dark, and we hear these groans and sounds moving through the walls. It's like we're in the belly of a dying beast. And then the lights come back on, and then we resume the movie. It's a wonderful sound moment, but there's no music for that little stretch. We're just left really as if we were Rose in the dark, hearing these clues, that the ship is not long for the world.
By this point in the movie, I think we've established Rose as extraordinary for her time and class, but she's about to take a step beyond that. She's ultimately put in a position where she has to really get physical in a much more direct way to some of Jim's other heroines. She's really becoming a woman of action.
There was no greater rock in the world than Kate Winslet. She was the rock of our cast. She had to work every single day. If she wasn't working with Leo, she was working with Billy Zane, a great actor. If she wasn't working with Billy Zane, she was working with Frances Fisher or, Bernard Hill or Victor. She worked it almost every single day, and she was the rock. She was always there. She got minimal turnaround, and I can't imagine what she went through. And she couldn't wear wetsuits, and she had to wear that sheer outfit towards the end where she's saving Jack down in the Master of Arms office. And I always remember when you see it in the movie, and she's got the axe in her hand, and she's walking down the stairs. She takes a deep breath, and she steps in the water. She exasperates that little, oh. That was her hitting 59-degree ambient water for real and walking through it and not shivering and getting mental about it and toughing it out. And both Leo and Kate having to go through that. We tried to bring the ambient up, and, occasionally we'd have to filter that water out, and we'd want to shoot and be at 75. Over the course of the night, you can always heat the water so it'd get down to a really low ambient. It was incredible.
Kate was very gung-ho. She felt it required a extraordinary amount of fortitude and endurance on her part, but I think she really wanted to experience as near to what it really would have been like as possible. So she really threw herself into this.
We did start with some quite big scenes in terms of performance, and it was like, okay, 3 weeks in, the performance stuff was out of the way and into the water, and it became another movie entirely. And then we started, I remember when we started doing all the stuff with the ship sinking, we lived our life by night for 4 months. I always say to people, you've got to understand, from January till the beginning of April, 97, I lived my life completely by night. And it was so weird. And I remember kind of feeling like at the end of the shoot, I was sort of crawling out from under a large stone and sort of blinking in the sunlight and kind of looking around again and almost seeing the world again for the first time in a long time. It was like coming out of, being in solitary confinement or something.
Leo, putting him in the water was something we didn't realize how difficult that would be for him. Leo did not like going into water. He didn't like the cold water. And I'm not sure those lines were actually scripted or if Leo added all of the shits in there.
He was really the girl, by the way, of the two of us. Really. I mean, he used to whinge and moan and complain about that water. It's cold, it's this, it's that. And I had way more water stuff than he did.
You see the first of the lifeboats getting far away from the ship, less than half full.
Now there's something you don't see every day.
That moment of feeling so isolated where they shoot a flare, and we cut to the very wide shot to see the flare pop in the distance. Jim is so scientifically minded, too. I think he probably worked it out for us, what the delay would most likely be in the sound to really get a sense of how far away we were. But little choices like that dramatically pointed out how lonely this place was and how unlikely they were to be saved.
I suppose we had a tiny glimpse again of what it must have sounded like, I suppose. I mean, the sound was what sort of got me. Was all those people shouting and screaming. I mean, as witnesses have described, like a football stadium on the evening.
The crowd work was a lot of work. Tom Belfort and Hugh Waddell did a lot of loop group and dialogue recording and tried to give it life. And if you imagine, usually you do a crowd in a movie, it's just to fill space. The crowd is a character in this movie. The crowd, when things are going well, they have a blend of nationalities that's important and different from different parts of the ship. When the ship is sinking, you have all these different emotions the crowd has to feel.
I mean, this scene is illustrative of the lack of communication that went on, between Builder, Captain Smith, Thomas Andrews, Bruce Ismay, on what was supposed to happen and what was safe to happen here.
That cost so many lives. Hundreds of more people should have been in those lifeboats and survived this tragedy. And Jim has a theory that Lightoller misinterpreted the directions intentionally in order to make sure there was space in the lifeboats for him and his men, since they were going to be staying on the ship till the bitter end. It's just a theory, but it's an interesting idea. In fact, Lightoller ultimately found a space on one of those boats and survived.
Even to this day, I think I'm really proud of that scene because, I come from a working class background in Dublin. If I had been of that time, I've just come to America now. I'm trying to make my life better now. That's probably what I would have done. So having those feelings behind the gates
I felt were just kind of, at that time when we were shooting, were real for me. And very important for me to try and convey it right and to try and make the audience see that this is kind of, it's happening, it's real. Because you do think back, you know, and you see the photograph and you think, this is just a guy like I was, like 100 years ago or 90 years ago, whatever. And I tried to make it real and tried to make it passionate. And even to this day, I think it's one of the proudest scenes I've ever done in my life, because it was more than just an acting job. It was like, this is class behind the barrier here.
You really got a great idea of what these people were going through. I mean, just the frustration of being trapped underneath and trying to get out and knowing that your life was in danger.
And this is a great moment where they're just the rich guys are taking care of themselves, you know, with money and guns and stuff, while, you know, everybody's in the belly just kind of dying.
One of the other confusions with all of the varied nationalities in third class is all the signage was in English. So now you had to find emergency exits, and you had families that did not speak English on board.
God, we ran around under this boat forever. And you think, you know, 1 or 2 times is fine, but when you're running through the boat for 8 hours through these mazes, up these stairs, through the water, trying to squeeze by people. I remember we shot this scene. It was like 4 in the morning, 5 in the morning. And it was the end of our day, and we were lifting up this really heavy bench and trying to run through.
Actually, I hurt my chin on this one. When we lift up the seat, we lifted it up with such force one of the times that it whacked off my chin, and I had a bruise on my chin, and Leo actually hurt his shoulder. And I had an ice pack on my chin, and he had an ice pack on his shoulder just before we shot the scene. This is one of my favourite bits in the film, where I get to punch this guy, because I punched him with my left hand, and look at that. I'm very happy that James let me be the guy who punches him, because it gives me the macho moment in the scene.
I think as Jim wrote, you know, throughout the movie, but particularly in the sinking sequence, he went to great lengths to make sure that the lifeboats departed, you know, based on the same chain of events that were historically recorded. But in between that, he added moments of fiction that didn't conflict with history.
Basically, in the prep of the film, we were all guided to read all the books that have there were like 8 books that had been written on Titanic and various eyewitness accounts. And Jim wanted to follow those sort of accounts. So if one of the ladies actually tried to climb from one of the lifeboats back onto the ship, that's what we were going to recreate as well. Everything was based on those eyewitness accounts.
The officers, well, they would know how it all worked and the mechanics of it, but physically we weren't part of lowering the lifeboat. We would be on the lifeboat giving the commands to the other sort of seamen, you know, to lower us down, you know, left and right. And they would physically do that on the night. There was no sort of, obviously there's extra safety sort of chains on there, but they would try to do it as they would have had to do that evening. So it was manual labor, you know, to bring them down and to bring them back up. So it was, physically exhausting for those guys.
And that was the mandate, that the fictional story had to move around the pylons of history. Jim always said, we have to fit everything around what we know to be true.
Randy Gersten stepped up to the plate again and scoured the world and found us our Titanic band in Switzerland, a band called I Salinisti. And the only person we added to that band was the band leader himself, that we cast an actor to play that role.
The upper-class I Salinisti music was recorded in Switzerland. The Gaelic Storm, lower-class rowdy Irish music was done in Santa Monica. But in fact, a fair amount of it was not known what piece was going to go in what slot at the time that we were scoring. And later we did recutting of the source music and worried about what keys things were in. But that wasn't a big factor, except for Jim's concept that each source music piece played by I Salinisti would be played twice once inside the ship and once when the musicians are forced to move outside the ship, and in which case they couldn't move the piano, so it's heard once without the piano outside the ship and then once with the piano inside the ship.
You better check the other side. Go!
We got a letter during production that, or during post-production, prior to release, from some representative of the Murdoch family that they had heard that we depicted Murdoch committing suicide, and they found this very offensive. And they wanted us to take it out, which Jim refused to do, but we did explain to them we actually felt we depicted him in a very heroic way.
Jim oftentimes referred to him as doing some very heroic things. Now, Ismay, on the other hand, I think was a character where, historical fact, supported the idea that he certainly used his position as with White Star to save his life.
This was the very end of trying to get all the women and thing in, you see, so you didn't actually see him doing good works. You just saw him sort of going for it. So in a sense, this did slightly colour his character, slightly made him die, and you can see the contempt and even the rhythm of the bobbing down, bob, 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 and then I looked up because I realized that I was losing my light. Jim said, "That was great. Why did you do that?" I said, "Because I was losing my light." He said, "Oh, I thought it was something profound." He said, "Forget about it."
Be another boat for the daddies. This boat's for the mummies and the children. You hold mummy's hand and be a good...
That's a moment that, it's the one moment in the film we have where you see a father, a first-class father, having to say goodbye to his children.
No, Jack. Yes. Get on the boat. Yes, get on the boat, bro.
And the ebbs and flows of Jack and Rose's relationship, of what, when they're able to come together and when they're pulled apart. Here's another moment where, they're really pulled apart, and she goes on the boat.
Go on.
It was a great advantage to me that we had as a tool emotionally the audience knowing the ending of the story, so that dramatically I can manipulate and Jim can manipulate an audience into loving this couple, knowing, despite the audience, despite themselves, knowing they're falling for this couple, knowing that it's not going to end up well. And there's tremendous heartbreak and drama in that. And I used it to the hilt. And indeed, it is heartbreaking at the end. And I think part of the success of the film is that you're so drawn in at the beginning, even though you know it's a disaster story and you can't help yourself. I think that that's a wonderful piece of drama and a way to manipulate a story that we wouldn't have had going for us if everybody didn't know the end.
Almost as good as you.
People go to film school and they think all the time about using various ways to guide the eye. So we move the camera and we use depth of field and frame the shot and do all these things to make the eye go where you want to go. And in sound, we don't do that as much as we should. Something I always learned from Jim was focusing the sound so that we hear the sounds we need to hear and nothing more. And the example of doing that is Rose, like a scene like Rose getting lowered in the lifeboat and leaving everyone behind on the ship, and she doesn't want to go, but she's going anyway. And then all the natural sounds of the sinking in the ship and the crowds goes away, and we're left with the music because it's really Rose's moment. So that's a example of taking sound and guiding the ear, pulling the sounds out we don't want to hear, and playing it from her perspective or emotionally making it her moment.
Music plays such an important part in this whole scene, this moment, that love theme that's so mesmerizing.
One of the things we had to do in order to create a music for a love story was sort of become more in touch with the feminine parts of ourselves as well. And we would make a lot of jokes about it because when we were standing around working on this very romantic music for very romantic scenes, James Horner would look at us and say, "Just look at us all. Our wives and our girlfriends would never believe that these are the same guys that go home and grunt and say, I'm just going to go to bed." And then we spend all day saying, "Oh, this could be so beautiful," and getting these beautiful melodies and just the right lushness to the sounds. So there was definitely some irony there. But again, that's the essence of sending Nixon to China. If you can get there through somebody else's sensibility, then maybe it's more universal.
I can't really overstate James Horner's contribution to this film.
And his dedication to the film. Oftentimes, composers take movies back to back and only give themselves, a 6-week period in which to score the movie.
Not only his time, but also his money. I mean, we did what they call a package deal, so we just had a dollar amount within which to, pay himself his fee, and then also pay to deliver the score. And I don't think he saved a penny for himself. He put it all into the music.
One of my favorite scenes is when Billy turns and takes the gun from his henchman and is running down the stairs. Well, we did a series of running Steadicam shots down the staircase in front of Billy and looking over, and magical, flawless. And I'm thinking, there's no way I ever did that. It is like the most dynamic stuff I've ever photographed.
Throughout the course of the film, I made various different sound effects with water that ranged from a roaring avalanche to the most subtle little sounds of water filling into the corner of a room. And what we had done for that scene, which was really quite an amazing event, was the sound crew and I, Tom Belfort, Ethan, Chris, and Shannon and I, and Bo Borders was also an assistant with us at that time. We went to the largest indoor pool in the Bay Area after closing time, and we brought fine china and we floated them on the water in this huge. The reason we wanted to go to a big pool is the larger the body of water, the less chance that you're going to hear the classic sort of echo that you get from a swimming pool. So we got into this huge indoor swimming pool in Richmond, California, and started floating all sorts of things around, china, pieces of wood and whatnot, and really we were after incredible subtlety. And that was one of the beauties of the soundtrack of Titanic, that you had these incredibly powerful sounds juxtaposed to the most subtle, little sensitive clinks of china as it's floating in water.
With the whole riser section, what we'd learned so far from doing other tests and shooting, on Titanic, is that the sets, although sturdy, just needed to be made triple strength, because the force of the water, even though you're just sinking the boat, there's no dump tanks in that, would rip the set apart, especially as we were sinking it and then raising it to do it again. And often, where you could, you'd put a meshing in rather than a solid floor, so it would let water in, let water out.
We had this one set, which was the third-class corridors, the third-class area, which was 200 by 100 foot wide, and it was built on this whole sinking platform that could get raised and lowered into the water, so that the water would come rushing in, everyone would come screaming down the hallways, and then it would get pulled up at the end of the day. Unfortunately, what would happen was, although everything was built out of steel and wood, water is an amazing feature that it's Mother Nature. You can't deal with it. So we'd lift up the set, and most of the walls would be buckled or pulled or stretched in all sorts of weird directions. Everyone would say, "It's a wrap, bye," they'd go, and it was up to me and another crew to then put it back together again. So it was a real jigsaw puzzle, and also hard work to try and take walls out, put them back in again. Everything is soaking wet, dripping with water. The humidity in there, because we've had hot lights on, is just making all the plywood just warp, even though it's marine plywood. So we went in, we drilled series of holes, and we put walls back together again, so that the next night, when everyone turned up for work, it was pristine, and we were able to shoot.
I have a great appreciation for what Kate and Leo did on this film. I mean, it's a very rare occasion when we actually resorted to a stunt person to do a shot when it was possible for Kate to do it.
I remember Jim saying to us, it's going to be quite scary. You are going to have only 2.5 maybe inches of water to breathe in some parts of this take towards the end. The ceiling is false. So if you get scared, you just hit the ceiling and you can come up. We would have come up and, been, on the dry part of the set. So the water comes in and comes in and comes in. And I started to think, shit, it kept on coming, and Leo is still under the water finding the key, and there's an underwater camera there, so he could not see what I was doing. And I was really freaking out, and the camera operator didn't know whether I was acting or whether I was really getting scared. And by this point, I was panicking, really screaming. And I'm hitting this thing, and it was stuck. It was completely stuck. And I remember Simon Crane, who was the UK stunt coordinator, who fortunately I knew. And because he knew me well, he could tell by this point whether I was acting or not acting. And he said he could hear by the aggression in my banging that I couldn't get it open. And he prized it back and just pulled me out of there. But I had no air left.
Because of the unpredictability of what water really can do, we had so many extra safety personnel employed to cover any eventuality. And it was really a question of doing your homework, placing people where you thought something might go wrong, and then walking away from it and placing people somewhere else as well to be safety for the safety.
Jim's sense of responsibility and his real desire to run a very safe set was constantly in his thoughts. And I knew that just because of the pains that were taken before each take to make sure that everybody was okay. Because the sets were large, they would send safety people through to make sure that everybody had exit strategies, that nobody had placed themselves in a position where they could be hurt. If anything happened, there was a safety diver nearby. In the morning, we would have safety meetings that would take actually very long times because we were doing them in 3 languages, but they were thorough. It was a very safe set.
This is where the chaos really breaks out. And Tommy Ryan, who had been the audience's eyes and ears, just again a victim of circumstances.
It was a good scene for my character because he's still fighting his corner, but he's got a gun to his face, and he's not going to. He wants to escape. He wants to live. We got Billy Zane coming in here, who's first class. And it's a scene about blood money. It's about the rich taking care of themselves.
Tommy Ryan, who had given them hope that they might survive, comes to a tragic but fictional death.
I thought I did a good death there, actually. There I am now, blood capsule, blood everywhere, getting very sticky. And there's the blood money.
I didn't really understand talk about dishonor or cowardice or anything like that. Taking the bribe as the last thing on Murdoch's mind. And this guy had kept these boats going, getting people to safety for a good while, done a good job. And I didn't think the suicide was a terrible thing to do. I'm not sure that coming from a seafaring background, maybe he would just have drowned. Maybe that was the honourable way for a sailor to go. I don't know. None of us know. There's clearly been eyewitness accounts that somebody shot themselves. But then, in the heat of the moment, the extreme heat of the moment, who knows? Some people thought it was William Murdoch, but then memory is bound to play incredible tricks at a time like that, isn't it?
This was really some of our most difficult filming, with the riser going down in the water, submerging the set, working on both sides of the ship. Numerous stunt people, numerous extras. It was big and complicated. This is a set that takes place, or the scene certainly takes place during the sinking, and the set is angled. But in fact, we only built the set level, and the actors had to put the lean into their performance to fake that the ship was actually sinking during this scene.
We spent all this money having sets that tilted and sinking sets directly into the water. So you're telling me we're going to go into a set that's just sitting on the concrete level and we're going to make it look like it's tilting? That was, okay.
What I remember is sort of leaning, this angle and James yelling, can you lean any further? I thought, well, no, I can't. Can you? It's like, and I remember there's a little a glass on the fireplace that slips off, and it had a little string on it.
They took a couple of glasses of liquid and put them on the mantle, but they were dried, whatever substance was in there, so it was at the right tilt angle. And you think and the actor just leaned a little. And Jimmy just took the camera a little bit like this, and it was a brilliant use of the tool. Oh, this is the scene with the baby.
Where should I go? Please.
So you're facing back towards the bridge, and this bit facing up away from the bridge. There was a gap of around about 3 months between those two when we turned that round. We did half of it facing one way, and then, oh, look at that. That looks so sad, isn't it? It's just so sad. There he goes. His grave. That's his coffin.
The captain, Captain Smith, in all of his career, had never had a bad experience. He'd never had anything go wrong. And so for this last crossing, for him to have this horrendous event happen, really sent him into shock because he wasn't prepared to deal with it. And I've thought about that very often since then because, you know, when life throws curves at you and you go through terrible times, I'm always thankful because you learn so much from them and you learn how to make things better and you learn to grow and you learn to toughen up a little bit. And I always think of Captain Smith on those occasions.
There was some controversy over what was the final song. The band made no effort to save themselves and played it on as long as they can, was not in dispute. But what song their final selection was, Nearer My God to Thee was, I think, that most people reported, and it seemed to fit the moment better. So it's what Jim went with.
This is another example of how Jim was able to put key characters at different places on the ship so that the audience could experience what was happening.
I love the transition at the beginning of Nearer My God to Thee when we go into the montage. I think it's beautifully played when they're on camera, and then the transition to the material that's over the montage of kissing the kids goodnight is beautifully done.
I think what was so interesting about the bedtime scene, is Jim's decision to not show the moment before where she decides not to fight to get out, but she makes that decision to put them to bed. So as an audience, you come in the middle of what's going on, and you all of a sudden realize you have to catch up to the moment of, oh my God, she's not going to try to get out.
Well, when we first started filming on the riser and we lowered the cables, we had added flotation because the cables weren't strong enough to pull up the set when it was full of water. And we added too much flotation, and we couldn't get the set to sink. So we had to go in and start taking out flotation in order to get the sinking to work.
Take one. You've got 300 extras. We're sinking the front of the ship. I'm climbing a rope, taking out a knife, cutting the rope. Billy is getting on a boat, jumping in. The extras are climbing over each other, and you've got 8 cameras shooting it. Take one. You know what take 2 is? Bring the boat back up, change everybody, dry off the deck, put the boat back, tie up the rope, dry the stunt people, take 2. I mean, on that kind of level, it was just, and I remember I was sitting there going, this is unbelievable. This is huge.
A number of the first-class men did choose to go down with the ship. At the time, it was considered the honorable thing to do, and some of the first-class men who got on lifeboats were actually tainted by that choice for years after.
It has been a privilege playing with you tonight.
I can remember the last shot of the film that we actually physically shot was the wheelhouse breaking,
which was a complete submersed camera platform, multiple hydroflex cameras, 4 divers, and 1 stuntman.
We put the stunt guy in, and then we were literally going to detonate the windows.
It was a 3-second sequence where the water would whoosh, and then we were completely submersed.
The water came in literally horizontally with such force, it was frightening.
There were tremendous vortexes of water that were caused by the riser going down, and we had lifeguards all around to make sure that nobody got sucked under any of the overhanging pieces on the set.
That cast, too, is to be commended. for all the things they had to go through. I remember we were doing a shot. It was a big production shot, shooting a lot of our people advancing from the front of the ship to the aft section of the ship. It was one of the great shots in movie history. 3 decks of extra surging. It's a bunch of people, and then through it come Kate and Leo. Perfectly timed, perfectly choreographed.
But this whole sequence was something where there was an abundance of riches, and Jim and Conrad Buff and Roger Barta and Richard Harris had to, really find the sequence in this mountain of material.
On a typical 3-hour dialogue drama, you could probably expect anywhere between 600 to 800,000 feet of film. We shot well over twice that length. So we had to be very creative in how we organized both the film and the digitized media. And if you have those moments when you just have to pinch yourself because you're working with this amazing, amazing footage with the scope that no one has ever seen before.
As the water started pulling me in, it was like, oh man, this is harder. And as the windows started breaking and I was getting sucked and I had to really use my strength to hold myself, I didn't get sucked in and swam forward and grabbed myself. And, Jim said something to the effect of, we can use a stuntman. So as an actor, you're going, okay, use a stuntman, but God, it'd be, that's a big face right there. I think I'll do it. And so I decided to do it and it worked out. Obviously, there's some great close-ups of me in the film.
Fabrizio actually had several different,
more complicated deaths.
What happens here is, the funnel falls on him, but as originally scripted, when that funnel fell, it created a vortex of water, and he got sucked into the vortex of water going into the ship, but it's something Jim chose to cut. There was another sequence where he actually swam up to Cal's lifeboat, and Cal, worried that the boat would get swamped, clubbed him away.
Then he's going, get away. And I say, no, please, you don't understand. I have to get to America. It's my destiny. And he takes his oar, and he smacks me on the head, and he goes, it's that way.
And that seemed a little too much even for Cal.
When the water poured in, it poured in with such force that it ripped the stairwell off of its foundation, which is probably something that might have happened to the real ship itself.
There was some other brilliant things about that dome implosion because there were famous renderings in paintings made by the historians about what might have happened on the ship that night. And here's a case of, here we are recreating it, boys. Well, those windows that have water pouring in them and the painting, it couldn't have happened because here we are recreating it. It only came in this way, the dome and these areas. So in resurrecting the whole idea of building the ship and resinking, we discovered some things that really would have happened.
With the jumps, with the people physically jumping from the ship, we needed to orchestrate a way of doing that so a lot of people could jump all at the same time, that they weren't going to land on top of each other. And it was really quite simple. It's sort of where no one jumped from exactly the same position as anyone else. And it was all, I think there was a 10-second count and people went, on different numbers within that 10 count. It was awkward for some of the girls when we normally put them at the lower height because of their skirts, because they were wearing all these old-fashioned skirts. As they jumped, they would often get caught on the railing and it would flip them slightly. And we had a number of girls that actually got flipped and landed very awkwardly.
Right now we're on the tilting poop deck set, which was a set that was a giant teeter-totter that went from level to vertical on a series of hydraulics. Throughout all these visual effects shots, one of the things that we did not realize was as critical as it became was the movement of the stars in the sky, because it was the movement of the set against the stars that actually told you what the set was doing. So if you look at the shots and you see the stars, dropping down in the background, it was telling you that the ship was rising. If you saw the stars moving in a horizontal manner, the ship was twisting. So it was very critical how we addressed the stars. And on the first night we were filming on the tilting poop deck set, a cable that was required to bring the set back from its vertical position snapped. And we left our stuntmen and extras, including my wife and son, up in the vertical position for over 45 minutes before we could reconnect the cable.
Well, we got stuck up there. I remember going onto the deck and seeing all these extras kind of chained to things and with wires and sort of harnesses, and the stunt people were so pumped up because obviously that's what they're trained to do, and they were in their element, like flinging themselves off the boat, jumping 100 feet onto crash mats and doing somersaults and sliding down decks on things that looked like tea trays on wheels. I mean, it was the most ridiculous. And Leo and I got there and we were like, oh my God, so where are we? And then we looked and saw our stand-ins right up at the top, and I was like, oh God, I think that's us, babe. And he was like, no way. And I said, oh, come on, it'll be fine. It's going to be funny, come on. So I went up there, walking past all these people. Hey, how you doing? Hanging on to something, you know. Hey, nice night for it, you know, hanging on to something else. Someone was upside down, you know, practically dangling from their feet going, hey, how are you guys? Yeah, fine, thanks. But we get to the railing. And so Simon's like, okay, so you guys are going to be on the other side of the railing. And I was like, right. So are we sort of hanging on, or what is it? He said, no, you know, you're lying down, kind of clutching onto the railing. Because when it finally gets up like this, you're going to be on the top of it facing down. So I was like, oh, okay, fine. Sort of climbed over and sort of stood there, you know, swinging around and showing off. And Leo and I are sort of goofing around, playing about and singing stupid songs.
You know, some of the inspiration for some of these images that we shot throughout the movie, not just in the sinking, came out of Ken Marshall's book, where Jim really used that as an inspiration. Again, this is another set that we never tilted, but we had the actor performing it. And in that case, that's Steve Quayle, our second unit director. Rob Legato spent weeks on location in Acton, filming large-scale models of the ship for the ship splitting and falling into the water, but intermixing that with live footage. It's part of what creates the reality.
The pulling apart of the ship, that was another amazing thing we had to do. We'd built this whole cam system underneath the deck so that as it pulled, it twisted and broke the set apart.
You see something like that, but what makes the shots work is not just the visual effects, but it's also the sound design and the combination of those that really created the immersive experience for the audience.
At this point, the ship was almost a dying creature. And so Gary came up with these wonderful animalistic moans that, coupled with the sound of all these thousands of voices that were flailing in the water, it just took on a surreal aspect, which really, you know, is a haunting and frightening concept.
So, but yeah, back to the tilting poop deck. That was pretty funny. We realised that there was no way hair and makeup could get up there to check how we looked. So we came all the way back down, and I had what you do not know is in the pockets of that big overcoat that I was wearing. I had makeup brushes, powder puffs, concealer, my lip pencil. I mean, I was kitted up. You know, I would have to do Leo's makeup checks between. It was so funny. The parts of it were kind of amazing, you know, lying there looking up at the stars, you know, with chaos going around below us, and we were at the highest point, and you know, no one could get to us. I mean, in a way, it was kind of quite refreshing and relaxing. It was like, they can't get to us, and they've got to get us down somehow.
Initially working on these vertical stunts, we had stuntmen that we would drop into green airbags or different devices off of descender rigs. But ultimately, we turned to visual effects to create shots like this, where one man falls, 600 feet into the water. We were really the first movie that technology was ready to allow us to put digital people onto model sets.
You know, all the stunts, the people falling off the poop deck, want to really be done live. And Tommy Fisher built this fantastic hydraulic poop deck area. We knew that we would have to elongate it at some point. But for the most part, the close-up work was definitely going to be real stunts. That it took a while to set this up, and you have the stunt guys and descender rigs and the whole bit. And one guy, I think, broke his ankle. Somebody else got hurt. And Jim, being who he is, he's not going to do that for this movie. He's not going to kill somebody for this film. He's not going to put somebody in harm's way. He said, can we do this? Can you help me out here? We can't sacrifice anybody for this thing. Can you pull it off? And I said, well, I think so. I think I can. I think we've invested in this technology. I think we can do it. And he said, all right. You know, I knew he wasn't quite sold on it because there's nothing to sell him on it yet. Just the idea that it would work. And that became part of our mission, is to do these digital stunts, which are now very common, but back then were not very common. And we had full cooperation with Simon Crane, the stunt coordinator, and we basically made it work for us. We were able to now do stunts that you couldn't ordinarily do.
That system has continued and it's got better. It just means you can do more. I like the combination of real stunts and CG in that you can't see, you don't know which is which.
Also on our last night of filming, we shot the elements of Jack and Rose in the water, where they get sucked under here. We also did that with a green screen in the background for some other shots that we needed in the sequence. And the original thought was that we would just see Jack and Rose and not see the ship, and the ship falling away behind them was an afterthought that we came up with in post-production.
The hardest scene for me was the stuff that we shot on the last day, which was in a 20-foot deep tank. I had no idea that I was going to have to use scuba diving equipment. And Jim Cameron, of course, was in his element because that he loves and the abyss and da-da-da. And Leo is certified scuba diver, and Leo was looking after me. But I was just terrified. And Leo was really brilliant, really took care of me and was holding my hand, and he was like, trying to get me to breathe properly. And so that was great.
All of this post-sinking, Steve, even these lifeboats were shot on an interior stage that was, really no more than maybe 100 by 100. And we are tank 4, and it's done very early in the schedule. This tank was only 3.5 feet deep, and the cast members in between takes could actually stand up, and on action, we'd have to get them back into their lower position.
I always tell people, that tank when we did the driftwood, 2 foot deep or something. And it always seemed really so ridiculous to me that, we're trying to act like we're drowning and we're just sort of squatting on our knees on the bottom of the tank.
We were in an environment where we had a painted backdrop. We painted a horizon line. We created a weir at the back of the tank where the water actually spilled over into this horizon line.
The last 22 minutes of the film were solidly looped. I did 21 clean, solid days of looping for this film. And most of it was the last section of the movie, because in that tank, so that they didn't get a hard edge or you didn't see the edge of the tank, it was just like, running into infinity. So it was just going into this filter system whereby it would get pumped straight back into the tank like a waterfall. So you could constantly hear this water. There was nothing they could do about it. So it didn't matter how hard we were working or how good we might have been in particular moments, whatever dialogue was really there was lost because it was all redone.
This is another situation where stars played a critical role because it was a moonless night, and the stars were very bright that night, and we had to add stars to the sky. But many of these shots are handheld shots where the camera is always moving, and unless we really synchronize the star movement to the camera movement, watching dailies, we got a very dizzying effect.
Extras in the background were divided into groups of people having fallen into the water. First group were people who had just fallen in, and they were very active and shouting out names. Second group were people who were beginning to feel the effects of hypothermia, so they were less active and not as vocal. And the third group, where he chose 6 people, were dead.
And when they had the big crowd scene, when they pull away and show everybody screaming and yelling, we were actually on the side berm, and we were part of the voice that they had everybody that was around standing on the berm screaming and yelling to add to that sound. It was kind of eerie.
When you hear those voices coming across the water and you don't know who they are, you think they could have been someone that you know, that you don't know where they are, whether they're in a boat or whether they're out in the water. There's a sense of helplessness, but there's also a sense of almost jealously guarding your own safety, and you don't want to give it up, and you feel horrible for it. And you know that if you jumped in the water, there wouldn't be anything you could do anyway. How would you be able to find them? And I think Molly wanted to go back and pick them up. And I think the tragic thing is that they could have gone back, but it was too late.
I think Frances is fantastic there, too. She doesn't have a word of dialogue, but you can just see her life is shattered.
I remember having to get into that place of complete devastation after witnessing something so horrible, to be out there in those little boats watching this unbelievable sight and not being able to do anything about it.
And there's another beat that was cut out here which was an historically accurate beat.
Officer Lowe was transferring passengers, and, to his disgust, he discovered a man dressed up as a woman. That sort of cowardice on that evening of somebody having the gall to, take a woman's place on the lifeboat in order to survive. And I think that was a sort of a poignant moment.
We had an interesting dilemma when filming all of these sequences that are post the sinking of the ship, which was we wanted to put our cast members in water that was a comfortable temperature for them. But in doing so, it prevented us from refrigerating the stages. Because if you brought the water temperature up to, 80-some degrees and refrigerated the stages, you would get steam coming off of the water. So we made the decision to heat the water, make it comfortable for the actors, and then we would add the breath digitally. They were acting as if it was cold, but it certainly didn't look cold on the day. And by adding the digital breath, it added that sense of reality. And this is the first scene, again, where sound plays a big role. We've just gone through a whole sequence where we had a cacophony of sound and noises, and all of a sudden it's quiet.
Jim made the choice to go without music from when the ship goes under until later in the scene. So you really feel the silence that descended upon this site as people who had been crying for help literally froze to death within minutes after being cast into the ocean.
When the ship is finally sunk and they're left alone in the water, in freezing water, it is deliberately quiet. No music. They're alone. One of the hardest things to do, Chris Boyes had to do this, was to make middle of ocean sound. If you think about it, it's really hard to find that without life, without birds, without something. So he worked really hard to take out any birds so that there was no sense of life. The people, the crowd sounds, and then they get smaller and smaller as time goes by, as people are dying. It really gives it the only sense of life until finally Jim loves using quiet in movies, which I truly appreciate, and it can be very, very effective. It's hard. Quiet is hard.
The heart of this movie is a love story, and I think it's an interesting little factoid that if you were asked the question, how many times does Rose say to Jack, "I love you," that the answer is only once. And his reply is not, "I love you too." It's, "Don't let go." It's something that doesn't need to be spoken, but he does it, through his actions.
And his sacrifice.
The ultimate sacrifice.
It's just a tragic moment for him. It was really very heroic to make the effort.
It took you back. It put you in that time. It put you in that place. And I remember we had shot all the inside stuff and for several days, and there was a lot of activity. And then he started to have us, calm down and be dead. And then we came in one night, and the lifeboat was in the tank, in the small tank, and everybody was quiet. There wasn't any laughing. There wasn't any giggling. There wasn't anything that was going on like our normal days. There was a lot of activity, and everybody had a sense that what we were doing it was time to be reverent. And we shot that all day long. I think it was 11 and a half hours, 12 hours, and we had to be dead in the water. And it was just like everybody had a reverence for what we were doing when we came into the set. And we got in the water and we started, the dying scenes and the dead scenes and picking out the bodies out of the water. And the thing that was the hardest for me, even while I was laying there and I'm dead, I'm listening to Officer Lowe hollering out, "Is there anybody out there? Oh God, is there anybody still alive?" And he would do that, and he had a cry in his voice, and that man made me weep every time he did it. And I just went home that night, and I cried myself to sleep.
Another, often overlooked element of the movie is the phenomenal job that our makeup department did in these scenes and throughout the movie, but particularly in these scenes, in creating, realistic makeup to let you know exactly the physical state of these people. Kate's hair was frozen onto the piece of wood that she was lying on. It had her rip off as she turned. Her skin was pale. And you have the moment where she thinks she's looking at a savior for both her and Jack, only to realize that Jack's no longer with us.
Jack.
Again, this is a moment where I think many other directors might have chosen to introduce music, to heighten the dramatics, and Jim chose to just play it just about them and her enormous loss. And I think he could only do that because Kate gives such an incredible performance at this moment.
Jack.
It's interesting because as an audience member, we know that old Rose survived. Yet we're wrapped up in this moment, and
you think her chance is slipping away. You think she's letting it go. I think there's really a moment of when you're really questioning whether she's going to give up or not.
She doesn't have the voice to call them back. She can't call out. And the hardest thing imaginable is for her to let go of Jack's hand. And it's not just that they're holding hands, but their hands are now actually frozen together.
The breast shots in particular, that was another series of shots that we were really, really concerned about. When you're dealing with an effect like that plays on absolutely critical scenes, for example, when Jack is submerged in the water hanging on to the piece of driftwood and Rose is hanging on to his hand and he slips down into the void and she's there. That breath could really get in the way of a scene like that, which is pivotal to this movie working. And the fact that we were able to get it good enough so it didn't get in the way is saying quite a lot.
There's nothing there, sir. But this is a moment where, again, we're only in a tank that's 3.5 feet deep. And, we had to, get Leo to slip into the water, and then we picked it up with a shot later on where we shot it in our deeper tank that we shot, I believe, on our last day of filming.
To this day, I love doing water stuff. I mean, just last week down in New Orleans, I had a scene in a tank with Jude. And what's so funny is that I'm now known as like the water goddess. So special effects guys came to me and said, "Oh, Kate, so, we know you have had a lot of experience in the water. We just want you to, test the temperature and, see if you're comfortable with that." And I was like, fine, where's the tank? And they said, "Oh, it's just, half a mile that way." I was like, fine. How deep is it? And they're like, 3.5 feet. I'm like, okay, fine. And what, if you got black on the bottom of the water? Is it black? You can't see the, the edge of the tank. And I'm like, no. What's the temperature at the moment? 78, 79. I was like, well, that's too cold. You're going to probably have to bring it up to about 85. If you go up to 88, you're going to get steam rising off the water. So forget it. I don't know. It's funny, but I really get off on it. I have a great time doing stuff in the water and kind of in my element.
The speech where I say 1,500 people went into the water. Only one boat came back. Was a very important scene.
I got to tell you, when she did this speech the first time, it really got to me.
After I had finished, Jim said, "Why are you angry?"
Only one came back.
And I said, "But it's unforgivable. It's not conceivable. I mean, first-class dogs were saved, and second-class people were drowned. How do you want me to read it?"
Sometimes in these scenes, you don't want to do too much. You just want to listen and let the story move you.
I just really admired her and, listening to her stories and watching her with Bill and Lewis and letting her kind of hold court was just so much fun to see.
That would never come.
Whenever you hear Sissel's voice singing the vocal melodies, it's almost always ghosted by a single French horn. Jim Thatcher, who's a phenomenal French horn player, They're always together. It just adds a little bit of body to the sound. But if you listen for it, you can hear that it's actually two instruments in one, the voice and the French horn. That's a fantastic performance detail that I love, and I never get tired of that.
The scene with the lifeboats in the water, where the Carpathia does come to rescue them, was the only day of any of the 1912 filming where we went out onto the open water, and we did it with the second unit, where they took lifeboats out into the water off of Rosarito, and then we composited it in the Carpathia behind them. You know, Rose seeing the Carpathia and this whole sequence, we had a sequence of her actually boarding the ship and coming on board that was cut from the movie, but it was such a dreamlike state that then the look on all of the faces, you got such a sense of what those people must have gone through that evening.
Again, the class distinctions on Titanic were maintained on Carpathia.
Third class kept here, first class allowed to go elsewhere. There's another moment where that woman on the right there with the red hair, in another version of the movie, Cal approaches her and turns her around thinking it's Rose, and it's not. And this was actually a redressed set of our forward well deck from the Titanic that we redressed and replaced at the aft section of our deck and shot this scene. And with this very somber scene, and we had a very funny moment when we were shooting it. It was our first AD's birthday. And we arranged for a mariachi band to come on the set with Jim's permission. And the first AD didn't know that. And when the band came on the set, he freaked out, thinking Jim would freak out. But it was all in honor of his birthday. Kate, seeing the Statue of Liberty and finding the diamond in her pocket and being asked her name, as originally scripted, was supposed to take place after the Carpathia docked in New York. And Kate disembarked and had gone through immigration. But as a cost-cutting measure, very early on in the game, we made the decision to play that scene on board the Carpathia.
We never found anything on Jack. There's no record of him at all.
No, there wouldn't be, would there?
I thought she was great. I really thought she was great. What could have been like a tool for the story, a tool for the movie, or, just something that gave us the information we needed to know about why we were seeing this old lady and her younger self. She cared. She really cared about making that really a character as opposed to just someone who was interviewed and had this story to tell. She really told that story, and she made old Rose completely believable and whole and real and very important to the film, ultimately, I think.
This was a scene that would kind of complete my hero's journey as Brock Lovett, that I had finally, through hearing old Rose's story, really understood the human sacrifice and drama that went down that night and the tragedy. And the idea of that I'm looking for some kind of monetary material gain from that was such a paltry thing in light of what I've learned, so that I realized that there is a greater lesson.
In Jim's original script, there was a lot more time invested in the contemporary story, several more transitions back to present day, and a more complex series of events leading up to Rose finally tossing the diamond overboard. But it became evident when the entire film was cut together that really the 1912 story and Jack and Rose's story were really the emotional meat of the film, and that except to the extent they related to that story and except to the extent of the reaction to their story, the contemporary characters are less important to the audience. And so that story was dramatically cut down.
And we were able to shoot this last scene of Gloria towards the end of our Halifax shoot, but we did have to shoot it out on the open water. And we thought that we had completed the sequence, but when we got into the editorial process, Jim decided to change this scene, and we brought Gloria back and had to do some pickup shots with her in order to play the scene in the movie as you see it now. And we all have our little moments that we'll always remember, and the diamond going over and swirling down in the water is one I think my kids will remember, because it's the first time we ever had a film crew at our house, and we actually shot the diamond going into the water and spiraling away in my swimming pool in our backyard.
One of my favorite moments in the film is this, when we revisit these pictures that we've established earlier, but now we have a context for them. We see that she did absolutely everything Jack wanted her to do with her life.
Jim took a big risk, staging the final shot of the movie with the reunion.
Jim wasn't certain what would work. None of us were. I wonder if it would be a little too maudlin to have Thomas Andrews and the band and Tommy and everybody there. As it turned out, it worked beautifully.
I think there were cast members such as Victor Garber who said, when we shot the scene, I never thought there was any chance of this theatrical curtain call being left in the movie.
When we shot that last scene, we all thought, oh, this will be cut.
And Leo and I were like, well, how are they going to use this? I mean, what, she went back to the dead, or she died too, and they met again on the vessel, once she died. And we could never quite figure out what it was going to mean.
I was shocked to see it actually in the film, because it was such a kind of a theatrical moment. And of course, it worked perfectly.
It did work because it gave the audience what they wanted, which was to see those two people get together. And at the end of the day, it was a nice crowd pleaser. And I liked my dress. I remember I liked my dress. It was white. And I was really quite pleased with that. It was sweet. But Leo had definitely eaten garlic that day too, I remember. Yeah.
Of course, this whole ending is transformed into the Celine Dion song. And as we, move into the end credits, I think there's a story, worth telling about James Horner and that song.
I had this girl, Sissel, singing all throughout the film, and I'd never seen the end of the film yet. Jim was still working it. I'd seen film sketches, roughly, and the whole thing from where Rose drops the stone into the ocean went through quite a lot of changes. We actually ended up scoring it, I think, 2 different ways. So I know what I've written collectively, and I'm looking for something to narrate the end of the movie and into the end credits. And we've gone through this cataclysm of emotions, and I've run out of instruments. Quite honestly, what could I write that could possibly outdo what I've already done, or even complement what I've already done in a graceful, elegant way, and say all the things that people are feeling at this point in the movie? What could I do with an oboe and an orchestra? I mean, I basically was at a loss how to make something that would mean anything to me. I'm sure to an audience it wouldn't matter, but to me, I needed something that propelled me one step deeper. And I knew Jim was dead set. We had always talked about being dead set against songs and all of that stuff. He hates that stuff. So unbeknownst to Jim, it started to formulate in my head the best way to end this movie was with a cue, not a song, but a cue with a woman's voice in it, and make it absolutely intimate with words, because I didn't think anything else would matter. It could be you could have taken any music from any place in the movie and stuck it in, and it would have narrated people walking out of the theater. What I wanted to do is not let go once the movie ended. And I had to do that very intimately. And as I started thinking about it, I started doodling around with the themes into something somebody would sing. And then it sort of evolved into something that was rather singable. But still, I didn't mention this to Jim because he was dead set against song. And I was afraid as soon as the song ghost raised his head, suddenly everybody out of the woodwork would be descending on Jim with songs they wanted him to hear. And it would have been a disaster. So by myself, I wrote this song and got Will Jennings to write words to it, who is a poet. And we had this song that we both liked. And I had known Celine Dion for a long time, and I went to see her she was performing at Caesar's Palace, and I explained to her this was all surreptitious. No one can know I'm here talking to you. And she loved the song. I played it for her and sang it to her in my awful voice, but she got it. And she said, I want to sing a demo of this. I said, gee, that's great. All right. So we went to New York a week and a half later. Meanwhile, Jim knows nothing about this. In fact, he complained, where were you yesterday? I tried to get in touch with you kind of thing, and I was, of course, out of town. I was in Las Vegas. I went to New York for a few days, and Celine recorded this song. And she had some of her handlers there. And I thought it was just going to be Celine and my prepared sort of accompaniment track, which I had done on synthesizer for her. And there were, of course, 6 or 7 Sony executives sitting there. And she started to sing this song, and she was so into it. It just brought tears to your eyes. It was just she was so into it. And it was quite amazing. I'm sure people go through that a lot in the songwriting world, but I had never been through that. And we had this great demo on tape. And still I told her and her husband, Renee, I can't play this yet. I just have to keep it here in my pocket until the right time. And that I came back to LA and I walked around with that in my pocket for like 3 or 4 weeks. Every time I went to see Jim, which was every 2 days, still playing my music, on the piano, waiting for just the right moment. And I remember he showed me a shot, which was great. A final of Rose, the old lady, first starts narrating about the linen and the tables, and the camera goes past her, and you see the ship lit down deep, and the camera starts to go up the ship. And as it goes up the ship, it sort of morphs and colors itself to Titanic being at anchor in Southampton. It was stunning, absolutely stunning. You just look at a thing like that, and it's just unbelievable to look at. And obviously, he was very pleased. So I was thinking, maybe now's a good time. So I said, Jim, can I play you something? And he said, sure. And I said, it's just some ideas, so don't take it too seriously. So we play this stat, and it's Celine singing the Titanic theme, for want of a better expression, with words. And he says, this is Celine, isn't it? Celine Dion. And I said, yeah. And he said, well, this is a song, right? And I said, yeah. And he didn't say anything more, and he listened to it. And then he said, this is great. And he played it again. He played for his daughter. And he said, this is great. I said, so you like the idea? Because you and I have always talked about no songs. And we tempted into the movie, and it was like magic.
When we were lucky enough to win the Oscar, I always had it in my mind that I was going to thank as many people as I could, because the success of Titanic, while Jim certainly was the visionary and the driving force of the movie, it was really a testament to the efforts that hundreds, if not thousands of people, their efforts that they put in behind the scenes to make the movie happen. And every person who is credited on this film deserves a recognition for what they did to make this movie happen. One of the things that I learned on the award circuit that we were fortunate enough to go on, there were 3 things that I learned. One is if you thank 50 people, there'll be 50 more who are mad at you. If you quote your own movie, everybody will misinterpret it. And what really matters is not the awards, but it's the audience that goes to see your movie. So for those of you who have embraced Titanic and have taking the time to watch the movie again and listen to the commentary from Jim, Ray, myself, and everybody in the cast and crew of Titanic, a heartfelt thank you.